The Albany Unified School District Board of Education. May we have a roll call?
Superintendent Wells.
Here.
President Chuchain. Here. Vice President Duran.
Here.
Trustee Clark.
Here.
Trustee Doss.
Here.
Trustee Hinckley. Here. Student Board Member Weinstein. Student
Student Board Member Weinstein will be coming shortly.
Student Board Member Mala.
Here.
Now we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'd care to join. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Student Board Member Mala, would you read the AUSD mission and vision statement and our meeting norms?
The mission of Albany Unified School District is to provide excellent public education that empowers all to achieve their fullest potential as productive citizens. AUSD is committed to creating comprehensive learning opportunities in a safe, supportive, and collaborative environment, addressing the individual needs of each student. Meeting norms. 1, maintain a focus on what is best for our students. 2, ensure a safe environment for all views to be expressed, treating each other, staff, and the public respectfully. 3, endeavor to find common solutions to issues through collaboration without sacrificing one's belief in what is best for students. 4, make a commitment to effective deliberation, each one listening with an open mind while others are allowed to express their points of view.
Thank you very much. That brings us to item number 5, report of action taken in closed session. There was no action taken in closed session. Board, now approval of the agenda is up next. Are there any changes requested in the agenda? If not, can I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes unanimously. And that takes us to our fun item, the Albany Children's Center Spotlight on the Healthy Me program.
All right, thank you very much for having me today. I'm excited to present the Healthy Me Music and Movement Program, which is a new enrichment program that has come to Albany Children's Center this year. And Simone is so kindly going to help me with our presentation. Thank you. Okay, so this is new for this particular school year. And it is a wonderful partnership between Albany Unified School District and the City of Albany. The Healthy Me Music and Movement Program is a multi-sensory experience designed for young children. So it is weekly lessons that come into classrooms, and these lessons are focused on important health topics, things like nutrition, drinking water, fitness, hygiene, and social skills. Andra was our instructor, and she created developmentally appropriate lessons with visuals and props. She reinforced the ideas with singing, dancing, and instrument play. They were high-quality songs used to reinforce the different health lessons of the week in both Spanish and English. And I can tell you it's really amazing to walk into these classrooms, months after Andra has been there, and the kids are still singing the songs. And all of this is funded by the City of Albany, utilizing the soda tax dollars. So I'm going to go ahead and play a short video clip for you to hopefully give you a window into this program. And it's a great practice as well, because I'll be able to, or we will be able to go to the City of Albany and share this with them in April. Oh. Before I share that video, though, this is our schedule. So the Healthy Me program did visit the 4 preschool classrooms and the 1 TK childcare classroom at Albany Children's Center starting in the beginning of this school year, and then moved over to Marin Elementary School, where the music and movement program was in the kindergarten enrichment, kindergarten childcare classrooms there. Now Andra has moved over to Cornell Elementary and is presenting the same program in the kindergarten childcare classrooms at that school. Yay. Okay, so hopefully that gives you sort of an insight as to what the children have been able to experience, utilizing music and movement to help build a stronger understanding about a healthy lifestyle. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to applaud your video. That's very good.
Thank you.
Director Mansker, can I also ask you, what was the amount of the grant money from the City of Albany soda tax program that allowed us to have this program?
Thank you. That's a great question. I don't have the exact dollar amount in front of me, but I think it was approximately $9,000 or $10,000 that the City of Albany has dedicated to this Healthy Me music and movement program. They also made a commitment to go to a few other preschools within Albany, ones that are outside of Albany Unified School District. I believe that is where Andra is going to go once she completes this programming at Cornell.
Any questions, comments from the board?
Yes, I wanted to ask, with this program or this grant money, do you need to do evaluation to see how effective it is? And I'm thinking more about at this age level, parents. Do you get parent responses to maybe the kids at home being more interested in drinking water with cucumbers or lemons in it?
Yeah, great question. And I have gotten a lot of really great feedback from parents. Most recently, actually, one family that has a preschool student at Albany Children's Center and also a kindergarten student at Marin on her own decided to send an email to me and asked me to forward it over to the city of Albany. So I will be doing that as well, saying exactly that it's been very meaningful and that both of her young kids have these shared songs that they share together at home and that the conversations at the dinner table are very beneficial in talking about healthy choices and the importance of drinking water and eating vegetables and fruit. I sincerely hope that the City of Albany will decide to continue funding this for us.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the spotlight.
Thank you.
And this brings us to item 8, approval of the consent calendar. Board, any questions or comments on consent items?
I'll move we approve the consent calendar.
I second.
Actually, before we vote on it, I just wanted to point out in our donation report, there was an interesting donation. Would CBO Kim like to give us some detail about the Golden Gate Fields donation?
About 4,000 to 5,000 a month. So we have received about 55,000 so far, and this is pretty much the only donation we have for the district. And we've been using the district the donation with for staffing, like T-shirts, for example, and the first day of school, those teachers' necessary items. So that's what it has been used so far.
All Thank you so much. And with that, I think that we have a motion and a second for the consent calendar. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So the consent calendar passes unanimously. And also, I think we can offer our thanks and gratitude to Golden Gate Fields for their donation. And that brings us to superintendent and board member reports. Dr. Wells?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My report, most of it's going to be tabled to item 12.2, but I did want to take a moment to acknowledge a very, very special coach, wrestling coach at the high school, where we held our Northern California champion wrestling meet all day on Sunday. I had the great pleasure to present him with the NorCal Coach of the Year. Among hundreds of coaches in California, he was the Coach of the Year for the amazing work he's been doing for decades at Albany High School with the girls and boys wrestling teams. He's a motivator. He's an inspiration. He really encouraged the kids to not just be athletes, but be student athletes and reach for towards your highest potential. And that resonated with the crowd of hundreds of people who were there with myself on Sunday. And I just want to say congratulations to Jason Griffin for being named the Coach of the Year. It is the greatest honor you can get as a coach. And so he's ours. So congratulations, Jason Griffin.
I've skipped a few updates, but I do want to take a few minutes here because, and Simone, if you can put up my slide when you have a chance. I want to spend a few minutes talking about our neighboring district to the north, West Contra Costa Unified School District. I'm speaking as a board member in sympathy and solidarity with their board. I don't think I'm wrong to state that folks who run for school board do so in hope that they will be able to improve education for the students in their district. Unfortunately, in West Contra Costa, that board is being asked to approve staggeringly deep cuts. West Contra Costa Superintendent Duffy wrote, "The budget deficit we face is $47.8 million. We have made a commitment to reduce expenses by $32 million in the 2020-21 school year and have decided to reduce the remaining $16 million in the 2021-22 school year," end quote. Their total expenditures for this year are budgeted at $405 million, so their deficit is around 10% of the total budget. When you hear something like that, what's your first question? Mine is, how did that happen? This was first revealed when an independent audit report presented to the West Contra Costa Unified School Board came in as qualified. And I just want to take a brief moment to congratulate the AUSD Chief Business Official, Jackie Kim, who has consistently brought this board audit reports that are exemplary with no findings at all. So in West Contra Costa, these cuts, I think, will hurt student learning. And West Contra Costa is already one of California's lowest performing school districts. The Education Trust ranked them very last in the performance level of its low-income students and third to last in the performance level of its students of color among California's 150 largest unified school districts. What will be cut? Well, you can see what's on the slide there. I won't read out all of those, but you can take a look. I believe at their last meeting, the WCC USD board approved the $6 million in non-salary reductions and the $2 million reductions at their district office, which basically cuts their administration staff by 1/3. Demetrio Gonzalez-Hoy, president of the United Teachers of Richmond Union, stated, "They will be laying off 250 members, and that doesn't include other non-teaching staff. So we believe they could actually lay off about 400 employees," end quote. Elementary class sizes would average 28, 34 in middle school, 39 in high school core classes, with some classes at 55. The district also proposed increasing counselor loads to 700 students that would allow the elimination of 16 counselor positions. To sum up, I have sympathy for the WCC USD trustees who did not create this situation, but nevertheless must make hard decisions to maintain their district. And I'm pleased that although we, as the Albany Unified Board, must also make hard choices, they are not anywhere near the scale of our neighbors to the north. Our district has been actively managing our fiscal situation with transparency and maintaining a high quality of education under increasingly difficult conditions. I will end by saying that the only true solution for our district, as well as all other school districts in California, is to increase basic levels of funding so that all districts can provide the education that our students deserve. I know that was a lot, but I am truly sympathetic toward West Contra Costa and toward Oakland and to all the other school districts across the state that are facing really, really difficult times. So thank you for listening.
Madam Chair, I just got to tell you that I really, really appreciate you providing the context of the crisis we have here, and not only in our neighbors, but throughout the state. And I will speak in further detail about how more districts are facing similar challenges and having to make tough choices.
Thank you. And board members?
I'd like to thank you, too. I just think that's so important, that information to get out, because beyond the pain that our next-door neighbors are going to be suffering, I think it does help to put us into context, the Albany School District, and while we want the best for our kids, as does everybody everywhere in the state of California, I think it just helps us to realize as we go forward and have to make difficult decisions that we all work together and in doing this, because it's very painful if, cuts are required or that sort of thing. So hopefully that helps to put our situation into perspective. For my part, I just wanted to mention that I was invited to participate, to go up to Sacramento on Valentine's Day for a really exciting program. I don't know how many board members and community members know, but the YMCA has a program that they sponsor called Youth and Government in Action, and it's a statewide program. Statewide, there was over 3,500 students from the state there. They basically took over the Capitol, the buildings there, and they had 3 students running for governor. And they all had to give their speeches, et cetera. And then there were different subcommittees that we went to where kids were actually developing bills that they had to present and taking them forward, arguments for and against. It was just really fun to see the kids so excited, all dressed up in their suits and just, it was wonderful. And my understanding, I asked about how many students from Albany High participate, and I was told 86 to 90 of our students participated that weekend. So this is something really exciting, and it's government in action by our high school students.
Thank you, Vice President Dural. Board Member Clark? Nothing? Board Member Doss, nothing? More?
On Saturday, I went with Patty Fujiwara, one of our ATA co-presidents, to the California Teachers Association breakfast for, I think it's Alameda and Contra Costa County. And again, the theme was there's just not enough funding for education, and there are we've now gathered, I don't know why I say we, there are now over 1 million signatures gathered for Schools and Communities First to go on the November 3rd ballot. And there's a lot of optimism about what that could mean for schools, but also a lot of concern that that's only a piece of what we actually need in order to get our schools to a point where we don't start every year thinking about what we can do without. So it was very inspiring to be around all of these teachers. There's my breakfast mate. It was very inspiring, very exciting as teachers and board members, and it's exciting to think about what we can do together to get more money for students. The other thing that happened this week was Ocean View East opened, Ocean View at the high school, and that seems to be going well, very exciting. The kids have a lot of energy. A lot of staff and board members were floating around this week. So that's an exciting transition for people to be using the new high school, even though they're not high schoolers. But it's been tremendous to finally sort of finish that wave and have Ocean View start demolition. That's it.
Thank you very much. Student board members report, please.
At Albany High School, the IIC has been considering moving AHS away from reporting weighted GPAs on transcripts with the intention to, quote, minimize misinformation about what colleges care about and to motivate students to better align course selection decisions with personal interests, end quote. So there's discussions at the high school for that. After a good season, the boys varsity soccer team qualified for NCS, and after winning the first 2 rounds against higher-ranked teams, they're playing there in the semifinals tomorrow at Akalani's. And leadership is excited to introduce AHS March Madness, which will be a dodgeball tournament in which teams will play for a final cash prize. At the middle school, Unity Week begins on March 3rd, and it is a week to celebrate the AMS community through different lunch and classroom activities. The first Latinx lunch will be held on Friday, February 28th. And high school students from Speak will be leading lunchtime discussions on body image, LGBTQ issues, and toxic masculinity at Albany Middle School throughout March.
At Marin Elementary School, tickets are now online for the Marin School Moonlight Auction fundraiser. The PTA meeting will be on Wednesday, March 4th. At Cornell, students will be auditioning for Cornell's Got Talent on February 29th. And at Ocean View, 4th and 5th graders, as Sarah said earlier, moved to the high school following midwinter break. I've been seeing some of them. They're very cute. I try not to say anything to them, though. Don't want to freak them out or anything. And then at all elementary schools, tomorrow, Wednesday, February 26th, is a parent education night on climate change action and what parents can be doing. Also, apologize for the lateness. Another commitment ran over time. That's it.
Thank you so much. We're at item 11 on our agenda, persons to address the board on matters not on the agenda. Board practice limits each speaker to no more than 3 minutes, and the Brown Act limits our ability to discuss items which are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items will be referred to staff for comment or consideration on a future agenda.
Good evening, board. My name is Nair Castillo McIntyre. I'm the father of India McIntyre, second grader in the special day class at Cornell Elementary. I want to address the board on something, our daughter's triennial and annual meeting, IEP meeting is coming up soon. And we're sort of hitting a roadblock in our communication with staff, as you may be aware. I'm reminded of some of the things that the superintendent's philosophy recently came to mind about being inclusive, collaborative, and transparent. My wife, who is the North SELPA liaison, she's a chief therapist or assistant chief therapist at, for California Children's Services, recently attended a conference titled it's the Association of School Administrators Every Child Counts Symposium. The theme this year was transforming schools into an oasis of hope. And one of the presentations was about partnering with parents and staff even through disagreements. Generally speaking, the presenter categorized disagreements as unavoidable and avoidable. And the avoidable ones are the ones that reminded me of Dr. Wells's philosophy. There are many disagreements that are avoidable if you communicate clearly, effectively, and transparently, and if you also collaborate. But for the last few weeks, we've had an issue in which collaboration has not been part of the equation. And some of this seems to stem from a view that parents are not members of the IEP team. They are sort of separate or different from it, or maybe even adversaries. And certainly, if you create a situation in which you're not collaborative, you don't communicate, you're not transparent, then parents will become adversaries. And that's not our intent or approach, but if we have to go there, we will go there, and most likely we will win. And the problem with that is that costs, that brings costs for the district. They're avoidable costs. My wife and I are committing to me volunteering at this phone banking for Measure B on Thursday. And even though we're doing it, sometimes it's hard to get the enthusiasm behind it, knowing that we're not sure this is benefiting our daughter as she should receive the full benefit of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Staff, that's referred to you. Thank you.
Good evening, board and community. I'm Karen DeHart, and this is Patty Fujiwara, and we are ATA co-presidents. And we are present here tonight to acknowledge our collaborative efforts to help make Albany Unified a great place for students to go to school. Albany students deserve the best. Invest in our highly qualified educators, invest in our smaller class sizes and caseloads, and invest in the best resources and supports for all Albany students. ATA members and supporters stand here this evening in solidarity with one another, our community, and the Albany Unified School District.
We know that our school board believes that Albany students deserve the very best. To ensure this, we must retain and recruit the best educators with competitive compensation. We must make sure that our students have smaller class sizes and access to resource supports. ATA members support wholeheartedly our Measure B initiative and continue to reach out to our community phone bank and encourage our neighbors to do the same. Albany students only get one chance at a quality public education, and our students are worth investing in. Let's continue to work together to create the best learning and working environment for all of us.
So Tuesday, March 3rd, Measure B will be on the primary ballot. A vote yes on Measure B is a vote for the best quality education for all Albany students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. DeHart and Ms. Fujiwara.
Can I ask, did you read from a statement? Could you make sure that that goes into the minutes of the meeting so the public can see it? Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Jen Gritman. I'm a 4th and 5th grade combo class teacher at Cornell, so ditto what they just said. But I'm actually here, up here tonight because I'm also on the organizing committee of the Albany Film Festival, and so totally separate hat. The festival is coming up on March 21st to 29th, and these are hot off the presses. There are kind of short programs, and so I just brought a stack for all of you guys. And so there's things going on from the 21st to the 29th, and I'd like to highlight the 21st, which is the Kids Matinee, which is at the Albany Community Center, and there's a lot of student-created films that will be shown that day, but there's great stuff going on all week, so I'm just going to leave these with you guys.
Thank you so much. That brings us to our review and discussion section. Item 12-1, Comparative Organizational Structure and Staffing Review Report.
This item is to review and discuss the comparative report prepared by School Services of California. This analysis includes a review of job classifications, functions handled by each department within the district office and at the school site. Danielle Connolly and Kathleen Spencer from SSC is here today, this evening, to present the report.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Board President Dr. Chuchain, members of the board, Dr. Wells, district staff, and members of the community. I'm Kathleen Spencer from School Services of California. And I'm joined by my colleague, Danielle Connolly, and we're pleased to be here to present the results of our review of the Comparative Organizational Structure and Staffing Review. We've provided a comprehensive report, which you may have just seen on the screen. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to review that. We've taken all of that information, condensed it down to a shorter presentation today, to really distill down the highlights and the recommendations that we have that we wanted to share with you. We're happy, once our presentation is completed, of course, to go over any questions you have on the presentation or the report, and of course, it's at the board's pleasure if they have questions during our presentation. We'd be happy to entertain those as well. So I want to start addressing the scope and methodology of the review. So we were requested by the district to come in and complete an analysis of the comparative organizational structure and staffing. And that includes staffing of the district office, its departments and functions, as well as the school sites. And at the school sites, it was a comprehensive review from office staff, administrators, all the way down to the very important roles of our support services for students, right, our teachers, and our classified and clerical support. And so I really think, just as a quick pause, that the district should be commended at reviewing its current operations and organizational staffing, because it's very common that we're in isolation, right? We're doing the good work of our district, and it's hard sometimes to take a stop and evaluate how we are as compared to other agencies that are similar to us. And it's something that we think really that the district should be commended for looking at that objectively as you review your district. So again, this was an objective analysis of your organizational structure and staffing. We look at, as we start this work, we start with your district, with Albany Unified, and we evaluate the staffing at the district office to understand how it functions, how the departments are organized, the functional areas. We look at reporting responsibilities, and we spend a lot of time looking at your organizational chart, trying to understand how the functions flow, where the administration is, and how departments are organized. We also take a look at other data, which I will detail in just a moment, but really to get a holistic sense of how your district operates. So in addition to that, we collect organizational structure and staffing data from a comparative district group. And so I want to spend a few minutes just talking about how we do that, what that process looks like, because it's a very important component of this study. It's what our report recommendations and analysis is based on. And so it's an industry standard across education and across the state that when we are comparing staffing in a school agency, we want to be cognizant of the economies of scale that exist, right, among school districts and the programs that are offered for various districts that may be an elementary district, a unified, or high school, right? Because there are different programs that are provided across both, or all three, essentially, grade spans that may be offered. And so when we look at staffing, it's important that we really evaluate within a reasonable enrollment band. And what I mean by that is that we don't want to compare Albany Unified with about 3,600 enrollment as of last year to a district with 20,000 enrollment, right? Because there will just, bottom line, be positions that exist there that don't exist here. There may be departments that don't exist here that exist in that organization because of the number of students they're supporting, and how they may be organized differently to do that. So when we look at enrollment, we want to make sure we're looking at similar enrollment to your district, and I'll talk about how we did that in just a moment. We also want to look at similar grade spans. So in your particular district, you're a unified district. You serve TK through grades 12. So we want to look at other similar unified districts so that we can, again, look at the same programs that are served, essentially, knowing that every district is unique, but essentially the programs will be a similar model. The other thing I want to point out is we do contemplate a few other demographic factors, which I'll talk about in a moment, but it is important to talk about funding levels, right? Because there are about 10% of districts in the state that are commonly known as basic aid or community-funded districts. And so those districts receive additional funding beyond what is mandated under the local control funding formula for minimum state aid. So they're getting additional funding through property taxes. They very often have a higher revenue base per student and are able to do things differently, right, with more resources. So it's important when we're looking at comparing districts to your district in terms of staffing, we want to look at those that are funded in a similar way. So looking at other local control funding formula, LCFF, state aid districts such as Albany. So when we look at the data that was collected and analyzed, we looked at position control reports. So what are position control reports, right? So just as a quick aside, position control reports, which you may or may not have seen, are a tracking document, essentially, of the positions in the district. This is looking at regular contract positions. This is not including any timesheet or substitute positions because they are not a budgeted account code position, right? And so what I mean by that is substitute employees are variable based on the need in your district, and then timesheet employees are a short-term arrangement employee that is paid for by a timesheet, and that employment can stop at any point, right? But for position control, that's where we're tracking our regular employment positions. When we look at organizational charts, it's again, as I mentioned earlier, very important that we evaluate that for the comparative districts that were selected and those other documentation elements that can include information about how a district is staffed. So when we looked at developing the criteria for establishing this comparative group, again, we looked at the enrollment band. So we identified an enrollment band of 2,600 students up to 4,600 students. With your enrollment at just over 3,600, that got us kind of right in the middle. So we're able to capture some agencies that are a little bit smaller and a little bit larger. In addition to that, we also, again, want to account for funding variability. Because your district does not receive concentration grant funds under the local control funding formula, you're not getting that additional level of funding that many other districts do across the state, because your unduplicated pupil percentage is just over 28% as of 18-19. And so I'll just add as an aside, you are relatively low in terms of your percentage, in terms of receiving that additional funding. The average unduplicated pupil percentage across the state is 60% for a unified district, right? So just to put that in context, there are a lot of districts that are closer to that 60% than not. And so when we identified this comparative district group, we came up with 9 districts that met this criteria. One thing I want to pause on just to make clear is that unlike if we were doing a total compensation study where geographic proximity, right, to our district is very important because we want to be competing in the same economic environment in our community, we want to look at agencies that we may compete with for staff. This is a different analysis, right? So in this case, the regionality doesn't matter. What we're really looking at is the size of the agency and those demographics that are similar, right? Okay, so that's how, and for most of these studies, we extend that net out across the state. You'll see that we have counties representative of across the state, Southern California, Bay Area, and so I will note that we had 9 districts that we started with, which is very common. We had 3 of those that declined to participate, and 1 that was not able to participate because of some challenges in the district. And so there were 2 districts in those 4 that weren't able to participate that were Bay Area districts, but they were, again, not able to participate. But we think this is a very robust sample. We generally try for 3 to 5 districts in the comparative group, and so we were very happy with these results. In addition to the demographic data that's provided on enrollment and unduplicated pupil percentage, we've also provided the numbers of students that are identified as students with disabilities and that percentage of total enrollment just for your reference. Danielle?
Thank you, Kathleen. Good evening. So we talked a lot about the data, the numbers, and that, of course, is one critical component as we think about comparative data and comparing our staffing levels. But there's also a lot of other factors that impact the story in terms of determining if you are appropriately staffed in the particular service areas. And there's certain financial resources. Kathleen mentioned those things, such as the concentration funding, but there's also special community funding sources that many districts either do or don't have. We have the parcel taxes here, which we'll talk about later on in the presentation. Also, number of facilities served is a factor as well. If you have more facilities in a certain area, that can also impact the number of staff you need to provide those services. Also, contracting out of services, and that is when either your staffing needs are not significant enough to staff that position within, or due to the extreme shortages that we're experiencing throughout California and all levels, certificated and classified staff, you find yourself in a position where you're outsourcing staff to provide services, then they will not show up in those tables that are in the report. However, they are expended through expenditures in other areas. And so basically we're looking at those staffing numbers, but also taken into consideration are the LCAP, the initiatives of the district, and other operational requirements that are unique to your community. And we have different positions in place for a variety of reasons. The first is that legal reasons, right? We have to have certain certificated personnel in place providing particular services with students, maybe the health and safety aspects for students and employees. That could come in the form of custodial support, maintenance support on the certificated side, nursing services, health technicians, a variety of reasons for those. The reasons set forth in your collective bargaining agreement, that's related to your class size. You have to staff your certain grade level areas within a certain range based on what you've collectively bargained with your teacher's unit. And then, of course, whatever initiatives are set forth in your LCAP, when you have initiatives and objectives listed in that document, you must have personnel assigned to deliver those services. And as we talk about the differences between each district and the difficulties of just doing a one-to-one comparison, we looked at certain aspects of certificated and classified employment to make those comparisons. The first with certificated are really based on the service area and credential area. You'll notice that in some of the comparison tables, the job title differs, but we put them in the comparison cells because they're providing similar services in those areas. And on the other side of that, with classified staff, with the job classifications, the positions which are in particular job families are also compared similarly. And then the other factors that we looked at in addition to analyzing the job descriptions were the funding source, which dictates what the, it should reflect what the job responsibilities are and what the work that is being completed is assigned to with that funding. And then again, those essential job duties on the job description. And then we have a lot of acronyms throughout the report, and we'll make pit stops along the way, but please raise that hand if we miss one and we're speaking in another language. But FTE, you'll see all throughout the report is full-time employment. Typically, that's an 8-hour position, and the employee's assignment in relation to those 8 hours would reflect their FTE. So if they're working 4 hours a day, they're a 0.5 employee. And I also want to note that teacher employment is figured at a different factor, and that's whatever the hours per day is assigned for your teachers within the district, which is maybe 7 hours, 7.5, 6, something like that. Whatever's assigned in position control. So it's less than 8 hours in position control, but that would still reflect as a full-time FTE. Okay, so we're gonna start going through the tables. The report itself, as you know, is quite large, and there's a lot of pages there. So we did our best to fit these summaries in about 15 slides for you tonight. We're gonna start with the district office service areas, and we're gonna go through most of these tables, but I want to point out one that we didn't include in the presentation, and that is your food services service area. And just to provide some reasoning for that, the food services department and program is in a self-funded program, and it is at this time not requiring any contributions from the general fund. And I'd also like to add that this district utilizes a centralized kitchen model, which requires additional staffing for traveling and distribution of food. And we see that variety throughout all the districts. If you have kitchen facilities at each site, or if you're traveling, delivering food, that's really going to drive what your staffing needs are. Also, I mentioned earlier the contracting out element that we see, and food services is a very common area where we see sometimes the entire department outsourced. And if I think one of the districts on the table shows a 0 staffing in some of the administrative oversight area, and that is a district who outsources their food services needs. The other department that didn't get their own table in the presentation is student services. There just wasn't anything noticeable in that area, but of course, if you had any questions, we have the report here with us, and we'd be happy to answer them. So we'll kick it off with the superintendent's office. Everyone's pretty certain here what the superintendent does for the district. The office is comparable in terms of the comparative group, except there's one position that is assigned to that department as a point to TOSA, which is the acronym Teacher on Special Assignment. That is how the district has categorized that position, which we typically don't see that assigned in the superintendent's office because that, as I understand, that TOSA is working on union business-related matters, which is not covered in the superintendent's office. So we just wanted to note that in that table, that once that is taken out of the equation, the superintendent's office is comparable with the other districts. The Human Resources Department recently added a Human Resources Technician 2 position, which then brought that department up to a comparative staffing level. Prior to that, they were quite low. Specifically in the administrative, clerical, and support positions. I also want to note, Kathleen mentioned earlier organizational structure and oversight and the departments that a supervisor is responsible for. Those things all impact the staffing needs and the overall work experience of the employees in the department. The Human Resources Department employs a personnel coordinator, which differs from the comparative group, and that the comparative group has director levels, executive director, and maybe an assistant super too. So that just is a notable factor in terms of the overall scope of supervision of the Human Resources Department. Business Services has a large scope of oversight, fiscal operations, facilities, food services. There's also some construction projects going on which generate a lot of additional work and tasks in terms of invoicing and purchase orders and all those different details that go on in the business department. So that is a factor that does impact this department in terms of the overall work experience, although this department does maintain the lowest level of administrative and support staff within the comparative group. Educational Services is another department with a large scope of oversight of curriculum and instruction, special education, student services, and the technology department. And again, the department is really reflecting an assistant soup of educational services. And there is an absence of clerical and technical support staff that are overseen by that department. And that is a noticeable factor that should be noted in terms of looking further into the staffing support of educational services.
Thank you, Danielle. So before we contemplate the special education staffing, we wanted to just address a few of the elements that there we go. A few of the elements that drive special education staffing. It starts, of course, with our students with disabilities and their needs, right? What it's required to be able to provide them with the educational program that has been defined in their IEP, their individualized education program. But it also is dependent on the capacity of the district. And so what do I mean by that? So the district is able to provide services dependent on those factors. So it could be the case in some districts that they're able to provide the majority of services for their students with disabilities in-house in district programs because they have the capacity to do that, and the disabilities that those students have can be supported by in-district programs. There are some districts that are in SELPAs, members of SELPAs, Special Education Local Plan Areas, and they have very robust regionalized programs or county programs that districts are able to take advantage of to help realize economies of scale of providing specialized support to those students with disabilities. And so in those cases, when they may be working more closely with the SELPA to provide services to their students with disabilities, we often see that there's less staff in a district, right, in-house, because they're not providing all of those services in-house. Not that they don't provide some services, but there could be a larger percentage that are provided through a SELPA arrangement. And so in those cases, we'll see that the staffing levels are lower in those districts. The other element that we just want to mention is that there are also some students that cannot be served in district programs and also in SELPA programs. And those students, in their interest for the best educational program for them, may be in a placement in a non-public school. And so those are typically outside of our jurisdiction as a SELPA or as a district. And so you can see that there are a number of factors that must be evaluated as we're looking at special education factors, not to mention the range of disabilities that we could have, right, in serving our students. When you look at a percentage of students with disabilities in a district, that doesn't tell you what incidence of disability that is, right? Is it a disability that requires some learning support, or is this a severely handicapped, physically disabled student that may require more support to be able to even just be in the classroom, right? They need help getting around, and so they need those additional aids. And so those are all things that we need to contemplate as we're looking at special education staffing. And so it's just important to note that we did not conduct a special education program review. That was not part of the scope of our work, and to really understand what each of the comparative districts are doing in terms of providing services to students, what types of disabilities those students have in their agencies, and what's required in their IEP, right, their individualized education program, as a required service. We did not do that evaluation. That's not part of this review. We're purely looking at the staffing, right? And so for us to really understand that, we would have to dig in very deep into each of the comparative districts, but also do really a full special education budget review as well. And so that is not within the scope of the study, and I just want to make that clear. So we can't make any determinations, right, about how those other districts are operating their programs. So it is just very important that when we are contemplating staffing for our special education department, that we keep those factors in mind. But we do think that there's a lot of value still in evaluating our staffing under this lens, because it is important to understand that those students with disabilities drive our staffing levels. That actually doesn't drive our funding, right? So under AB 602, Assembly Bill 602, which has been our special education funding model for a number of years, there's some proposals and plans to change that, but right now we're operating under AB 602. Special education funding is actually generated based on your total ADA, so your average daily attendance. It's not generated just on your special education student ADA that's generated. And this was done many years ago to ensure that districts weren't incentivized to over-identify students with disabilities to achieve a higher funding level, right? So we're getting funding based on our ADA. So when we look at those enrollment numbers, and enrollment drives ADA, right, which is our final calculation that we're funded on for our students attending class, we know that we have to keep that in mind as well, right? Because we don't determine who comes into our district with a disability as a student, and we need to be prepared to serve them. And our funding model should be the same. It is important to remember, though, that special education funding flows through the SELPA, and the SELPA actually receives those dollars, and then the dollars are distributed to member districts in the SELPA based on the allocation plan that's been determined locally in the SELPA. So those are, I think, just some important things to think about as we evaluate special education staffing. But we do think, again, there's value in looking at these numbers and comparing them with our same standard of total enrollment in the districts. But we did provide for your reference in the report and here on this slide the number of students with disabilities that have been identified in each of the districts and what % of enrollment that is. And I just note that the statewide average right now for students with disabilities is about 12%. So many of the districts are on the lower end. There are 2 districts that are right about or above the statewide average of Coronado and Piedmont, but everyone else is hovering quite a bit lower than that. And so, you know, when we look at special education staffing overall in terms of the administration, we didn't see that was, we didn't see any issues there in terms of the comparative analysis. We saw that was similarly staffed. Where we did see a difference in terms of your staffing was on the paraeducators for special education. And so when we looked at the total FTEs for this staffing service, we see that we do report the highest number of total FTEs. But when we look at the actual ratio ratio of students enrolled per staff, we are not necessarily staffed at the highest staffing level. There are 2 districts that relative to student enrollment actually have more staffing than Albany Unified, and you can see that with the enrollment to FTE ratio. And so it is important that as we are evaluating these staffing levels again, I just can't emphasize enough, this is really requires a deep dive. The purpose of our report is not to tell you where to make staffing adjustments, if any. The purpose of our report is to identify for you areas that you need to dig in a little deeper and really perform your own analysis to determine, as we said earlier, what are our priorities, right, as a district? What are our board goals? What is in our LCAP? And what's required to serve our students with disabilities here in our district? And so those are things that we think are very important to consider, but we want to provide this data as part of that conversation. So when we look at the area of technology, this is another one of those functional areas where the district is a little different in terms of comparing to the other school districts. You here in Albany do not have a director over the technology department. There is a network coordinator, but in all of the other comparative agencies, we see a director or executive director or a chief technology officer in this area. And so that is a different function. Technology in your district reports to your educational services department. And as Danielle mentioned previously, that department has a very low staffing level as compared to the other districts. And so there's a high level of oversight in that educational services department with a number of positions reporting there. And so when we look at the enrollment to staff ratio, the district has the highest ratio, meaning it has the fewest staff per enrolled students here. And then when we look at maintenance, operations, and facilities, quick note about this. When we completed our review, this was the staffing level and the staffing that was in place at that time. We know that since we have completed our report, that the district has hired a director of facilities who just recently started, and we recognize that and would add that when we look at adding that staffing in, it actually brings the district up to a more comparable level, because currently, or with the former staffing level that was in place when we completed our report, the district staffing level was lower than most of the comparative districts. And so when we looked at that level of student enrollment per staff, we had the second highest ratio, meaning we had the second or one of the fewest amount of staff per enrolled students. And so this department was one that reported up to the business services office without that director level support, and so we think that brings you more in line with how the other districts are organized. And then school site staffing. So we want to talk through this, and as you probably have seen in the report, it's a considerable section of our report. We wanted to bring it down and distill it down into a summary to really talk about some of the areas that we think you should evaluate. And so when we look totally across all of the districts, you'll see that we've broken out the employee groups into 4. And so we have administrative staff, certificated staff, clerical, and classified. And so it's important to know that for these staffing arrangements, it's based on function, right? I just point that out because when we look at our clerical and classified line, knowing that those are typically our classified staff in the district, that's still true, but functionally we have some that are assigned to the clerical support area. And so that's how we've broken that out and made that distinction. When we look at the administrative staff across the school agencies, it's very comparable. The thing that is interesting about that is that of our 6 districts that are including Albany, though our enrollment, as we talked before, the band is very similar, the configuration of each district is different. And so it was very interesting. We have 3 districts, including Albany, that has 5 school sites, and 3 that have 4. And so we would expect that some of that administrative staffing, base clerical, office support staffing at each school site, in those that have 5 sites, we'd see that as a higher level, right? Because we typically at every school site have that base fundamental operational level of support. And so that's something that we would expect to see as a difference. For certificated staff, though, that is not as much of a driver, the number of sites and the configuration. It truly is more driven on student enrollment. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So when we go down the line from administrative staff and look at the certificated staff, Albany does have the highest number of total FTEs in the comparative group. When we look at clerical staffing, the district has, again, the second highest staffing in this area when we look at total FTEs. So this is not completing that enrollment ratio that you've seen. In the report, there's more detail on that analysis. And then in terms of classified staff, the district has the lowest FTE in that area. So when we look at total FTE or full-time equivalents across the district, we're at 225.31. And so that's actually the second highest total FTE of the comparative group. But what's very important to remember is because there is some variation, right, in our enrollment, and because we are a smaller district, even just 100 or 200 students can make a big difference in how that is calculated. When we do that enrollment ratio, the district is actually ranks 3 of 6, meaning there are 3 districts that have more staff relative to student enrollment than Albany. So this is why we can't always just look at the straight numbers, right? We can't always just look at the FTE. When we look at those calculations, it tells a little different story. And so, as I said, certificated staffing is oh, yes?
Sorry, are we supposed to be saving our questions till the end, or?
Whatever your pleasure is.
Oh, okay, great. So I have a couple. One is, so do you, when you're looking at this, are you taking the individual schools, or are you taking, like, looking at all those schools and then taking the average and comparing it to Albany?
So we did not do any averaging, so this is a full data count of every position that was reported in position control for each of the districts. And so what we did in the report is we actually broke out for each grade level of school. So in elementary, middle school, and high school, we aggregated all of the data together. So we have all of the teachers at all of the elementary schools in Albany. We have all of the teachers in Coronado represented in a table. And so if you'll look in the report, it has actually a column for each district and breaks out by certificated staff, elementary, middle, and high. So it's not averaging, it's a total of all of the school sites of that level. Does that make sense? Yep. Yeah, okay.
Excuse me. And then another, that was a great explanation, by the way, thank you. And I'll go back and look over that. Looking at was that Oak Park? Mm-hmm. Where looks like they have almost 1,000 more students. But I'm just wondering, like, how it's such a large difference in students, but so maybe.
But the ratio doesn't reflect that. Right. And so that's where that ratio is helpful, because it allows us to look at districts that may have slightly different enrollment than ours to see, relative to the students that they're serving, what is their staffing level. And so what that tells us in Oak Park is they have fewer teachers than many of the comparative districts, including Albany. They do have more classified staff than many of the districts. But what's different about Oak Park, though, is that I would say that overall they're staffed at a much leaner level than all of these agencies. And so that's a programmatic decision that they've made. It may be budget driven. It may be how they're organizing their programs, but generally relative to the students that they're serving, they have fewer staff than all of the other districts.
I think we've got 2 more slides. So let's.
Okay, I can wait. Yeah, I can wait till the end.
Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, certificated staffing, though the other administrative or office support staffing may be driven by the number of sites, certificated staffing is not, and so that's particularly driven by enrollment, right? How many students you're serving. And so your teachers, counselors, and librarians, those are typically staffed to class sizes and enrollment ratios, right? And so when we look at the total FTE, as I mentioned, the district has 191.5 certificated staff, and that is the highest in the comparative group, with a pretty broad range of 142 in Piedmont up to 191.5 in the district. But it's very important to remember here in Albany that when we add in the very generous support of the parcel tax, there's 20% of that 191.5 FTEs are actually funded through your parcel tax. And so I think that's a very important consideration, because if we take those positions out of the analysis, that actually brings you down to 150.8 FTEs, which is on the the much lower end of the FTE staffing for teachers. So it's important to recognize that and the outstanding support that you receive from your community here. So Danielle, would you like to finish up the presentation?
Yes. Okay. Back to the district office again. We're going to switch gears and wrap this up. We've been down a long journey, covered a lot of ground. I'm sure we have some questions. But just in summary, the district office ratio of enrollment is third lowest among the comparative group at 26.92. And that number is greatly impacted by the food service staffing, which we've discussed the rationale for that earlier, and then also the paraprofessionals in the special education service area. Also, some areas to continue, we are recommending a continued discussion by the board and community to take a look at the special education staffing area that we've mentioned earlier, and then also educational services specifically in regards to the large scope of oversight and absence of support and clerical administrative staff in that department. And that brings us to question time.
Whoa, thank you very much. That was a very detailed and useful report. I want to open it up to board questions and comments, and then we'll have community questions and comments immediately after that.
Okay. I was assuming this the whole time, but I want to make sure I was assuming correctly. Were all the districts that you were comparing Albany to kind of in the similar range of an economic situation and also as expensive to live in? Okay. Okay.
So no. Oh. So as I mentioned earlier, as we establish the comparative district group, we're not really looking at cost of living because we're not analyzing compensation in this particular study. We're really truly just looking at staffing levels, but we do account for some demographic evaluation across the districts by looking at the unduplicated pupil percentage. So that's your free and reduced price eligible meal students, right? Your English learners and oh my gosh, I just.
Foster kids.
Foster care.
ELs.
And ELs, English learners, very important. Yes, English learners. And so your unduplicated pupil percentage. So that helps to identify part of your demographic. It does not tell the whole story of your district, right? But it is important because it drives funding. And so for the local control funding formula through which your district is funded, it generates, depending on your level and your percentage of unduplicated students, it generates additional funding or not. And in your case, you do not receive an additional level of funding. So that's why we limited it that way. So truly for this study, we're looking at similar enrollment and similar grade span, so looking at unified districts.
Okay.
So that was a great question. And if you look at the last cell over there with the UPP percentage, we captured all the districts in the comparative group are under 55%. And that's very important because once they hit that 55% threshold, then they get that additional funding, and it's just not a level playing field in regards to resources.
My questions or concerns had more to do with district staff reaction to your report. Your report has just so much information, and it's really good to, I think, break it down in terms of how we respond to that, and certainly gives us a tool to go forward and really have some thoughtful planning around budget and what we're going to do in the future. I know that last year we had to make $1 million cuts, and what happened was we basically decimated our district office. And we certainly, I think, feel the results now. Today, from parents, we get concerns, complaints, whatever, from parents, from staff at the schools, and these two administrators right here, they do all the work. They're a one-person department, and I know they spend so much of their time, and they have zero clerical support staff, and you've noted that in your report. And so I'm just thinking that as we go forward as a community and think about if we're going to do reductions of any kind, or to what degree any measures are helping us out, that we in fact consider the folks at the district office that are doing a tremendous amount of work without any kind of support, but ultimately the sites do feel it. And I think that's incumbent on us to realize that and you know, be thoughtful about our decisions going forward.
I just have a additional information question that in the report you had. There were two things that were very interesting about the report. The one was the whole report's interesting, sorry. The one was the long discussion of how we have relatively few classified staff and how some of that is probably that we have teachers who are able to do that work since we have a higher level of teaching staff. I'm curious to hear you elaborate on that a little bit. And then the second question is, I don't know if you have the report, if you're able to show elements of the report, but there were tables in there about class size that I think are also helpful in answering some of how Albany compares to the other districts in the table.
Sure. So relative, do you want to take that one first? No, okay. So relative to the, Tag, you're it, right? So relative to the classified enrollment or classified staffing, you're correct that the district, and I'm sorry, don't get dizzy if I switch the sides here quickly, but no, I think it's in the back. I do think, you know, as we look at, are you speaking specifically to the school site at the classified level here? The classified staff, yes. So you're right. I think you can draw some conclusions that some of the other districts may have more classified staff because they have fewer teachers. And so it could be in your district that you have more certificated staff that are providing support services for students in that way. And so that's a programmatic decision that your district may have made. And these other districts may have made other programmatic decisions that would be different. I believe that is, at least in my analysis of the data, definitely the case in Oak Park Unified. They appear to have a higher level of classified support positions for the classroom, and as a result have fewer teachers. And so that, again, is a programmatic and potentially budgetary decision that they've made. But do you want to add anything on that? No? Okay. And then your other question about the other staffing data, I'm happy to walk through if that's something that we have time for and we want to do.
Yeah, I mean, there are several tables about class size that probably would take too long to walk through, although I think it's interesting for people. But there's one on page 66 that's just, that groups them by multiple grades, so it might be the more.
Of course. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So this data on page 66, and I know Jackie is quickly trying to scroll there so we get it on the page. There we go. So this data is taken from our CADI report. And so it's the comparative analysis of income and expenditures. And so that is a report that we at School Services compile in conjunction with the California Department of Education. It's based on a number of data points which are referenced here at the bottom of the table. But where this data really comes from is from your CBEDS reporting and is related to your class size. And so this data, what I will note here though, is because there's no one from CDE in the room, right? Okay, so CDE takes a really long time to certify the data. So we are just now, in about 2 weeks, releasing updated information for 2018-19. So it's important to note with this data that the most recent state certified data we have is from 2017-18. So this data is, a few years old, so it may not reflect where you truly are right now, but the trends are probably still similar, I would imagine. And so this data is really a compilation of all of the data that is reported by each district. And so it doesn't contemplate any specific circumstances. It's really just a reporting of students and then a reporting of the classroom teachers to develop the averages. And so when we look at this, what I thought was very interesting about your data in particular was that on an overall district average class size, and again, this is just students divided by teachers based on a few factors I'll talk about if we go to the other slides. But it shows that you actually have a higher average class size than, than 3 of the other districts. But when you look at the grade spans broken out, it actually shows that, for example, for grades K through 3, that you're not quite as high, that you actually have a lower relative class average than many of the other comparative districts. Same thing with grades 4 through 6, and grades 7 and 8, it's a little bit higher. Same with your grades 9 through 12. Part of that is based on how the number is calculated. So if you, and I don't know if we want to turn to another chart just to explain that quickly, but there's more detail on pages 68 and So 68 shows for your grades K through 6 class sizes. You can see, again, it's just a pure reporting of numbers. So it's average, or number of classes, and then you report the enrollment for those classes, and then we do an average. And so this is the way this number has been calculated for over 20 years historically. And so you can see that generally you're below in average class size the comparative district group. But if you go to the next page, this is where it gets a little tricky, because when you look at your core classes, your average class size is actually below the comparative districts in many cases. But when we look at your vocational education, which you didn't report any staffing, but in music, and then also in physical education, your class sizes were slightly higher, and particularly in music, it really skewed your average in that case. So though your core classes, all very important subject areas across the board on this chart, but for those kind of core academic classes, your average is actually very competitive and comparable. But when we add in those others, it brings your average up. And it's the same thing on the next page, on page 70, for your secondary classes. It's the same methodology. For most of those core classes, you're below the comparative average, but when we add in music, and in this case, vocational education, and let's see, it was physical education, which you're just slightly above the average. It brings your total average up. So does that help a little bit explain? Okay. There's a lot of data in here.
And I just want to point out that this full report is in the agenda packet, and so it's available to anyone. Any member of the public can dive into these. I see one community member wanting to comment. Please come forward.
Oh.
Hi. I'm Jessica Cross, and I'm on the Budget Advisory Committee, and this is...
And I'm Stephen Naif, also on the Budget Advisory Committee.
We received a presentation a little bit earlier, and we didn't have time to convene again after, but we had a little subcommittee just kind of prepare some highlights that we wanted to give. So first we want to say we appreciate the effort to follow a data-driven approach here, so we wanted to thank the district office for pursuing that. Neither the BAC or the subcommittee, I just want to note this up front, will be responding to the reduction recommendations tonight. We haven't had a chance to review them or discuss them as a committee. So none of this is about this report. Yeah.
Sorry, and this is not our full committee?
Yes.
It's gotten together yet? I'm not sure if you said that.
Just a subcommittee, yeah, but
Yes,
you didn't, you're highlighting it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's 4 of us that, small enough to have a legal subcommittee in between, because our next meeting is March 4th. One of the things a lot of people were concerned about were the methodological limitations, which the presenters did a great job of explaining, but we just want to make sure that's highlighted. One thing is, the comparison group is limited to districts that responded with data, and in some ways that might not be representative of the category as a whole. Another area is where there's data that we don't have that would allow us to interpret the results. And I think that came up in the special ed discussion. But importantly, this issue of not having any information on contract services, because it's a major limitation, because you don't actually know what other districts are spending on a function. You just know how many FTE they have. And in some cases that some of those services might be provided even by credentialed personnel in Albany, but just a contractor elsewhere. And so it's somewhat hard to fully interpret without having a little more information. And then on special ed and ELD, like more programmatic information would help, as discussed, would help with an understanding of the relative levels and why they're the way they are. Sorry, if we can just go a little, no information on elective offerings at the secondary schools, so in some ways that would help with understanding secondary certified staffing levels. And we also wanted to highlight this issue that the report only examines FTE and not compensation levels. That's important because we don't have any comparative information with these districts on things like the benefits packages that they offer and how those compare to what we offer. So it's how many people we have, but not how much we're spending on people. And so that limitation is important to remember, and the fact that it's a limitation of this study shouldn't be interpreted as limiting the possible avenues for addressing the shortfall. Second, we just wanted to mention the food services issue and that it's a self-supporting enterprise, and so probably has limited relevance to the shortfall and doesn't merit a major examination. Now, that said, in the event that food services is not successfully self-supporting and requires general fund bailouts, as has occasionally happened, the district may want to evaluate these staffing levels to reduce the possibility that that's a repeated outcome. Anyway, setting those limitations aside, the report does suggest that our district's class size level to relative to other districts, and this just came up in response to Sarah's question, depends really on grade level. And so we seem to be about average for 7-8, small for K to 6 more or less, and then we're kind of large, a little bit large at high school compared to these schools. That we're relatively light on FTE and administration. That was made clear, not all administrators, but in business services, educational services, HR, student services, technology. And we had maintenance and operations, but then I just saw that changed. And we're understaffed potentially in some of these areas. And so that suggests that the idea of this idea of cutting administration to keep cuts away from students is often a popular thing, but we've already made significant cuts, and these findings suggest that further efforts to reduce FTE in these areas might actually jeopardize our ability to function. Finally, Albany appears to have more non-classroom certificated personnel than the other districts, and these include intervention teachers, ELD coordinators, prep time teachers, PE teachers, and these positions provide very important student support, and more research would be needed to assess whether some of these functions are being provided through non-FTE channels in other districts. But if the district is forced to reduce positions, and if it is confirmed that we are high in these functional areas rather than just in FTE, the district should carefully evaluate the relative benefit of these kinds of important services compared to the important benefit of small class sizes. Anyway, we just wanted to also thank the district staff for the report, and our committee will respond more thoroughly to it and to the reduction proposals fiscal stabilization report after we've had the opportunity to convene as a full body. Stephen, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's the main point, is that it's just a very brief reflection of this report based on just a few people's comments on it, and that, we need some time to convene and really sort of go through all the details. Okay, thank you.
I want to thank the Budget Advisory Committee for taking a look at this report and giving the board feedback.
Hi there. Nair Castillo-McIntyre again. Thank you to the School Services of California for the report. One thing that the budget committee members touched upon is about the comparative sample. So this report obviously relies a lot on the quantitative data. But one part that would be very useful in the future for you to evaluate how you compare to other districts is on terms of the qualitative data. It might not be useful for you to say, well, we need to have as small class sizes or as large class sizes as these other districts that are doing that seem to be doing fine based on the numbers if it turns out that their outcomes are really poor. We don't want to benchmark against poor performers. We want to benchmark against high performers. That's one point. And then another point that Vice President Duran kind of touched upon is the decision made last year about cutting some staff. Last year you combined two, again, I've said this again, before, but you combined two huge positions in special education and student services. And if the philosophy was that let's cut positions on the basis that they won't touch students, that is not happening. Students are feeling the effects of that decision. So it would be very helpful to reconsider that and address it accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dina Yu. I'm a reading intervention teacher as well as ELD specialist at Ocean View Elementary. So I went through and read the report, and I am going to speak a little bit about the proposed budget cuts because I feel like they're tied together. But what I noticed about the report was the only school district I was familiar with was Piedmont. And I don't think that the Piedmont demographic, although we're using the term demographic, is the same as Albany. So when I looked at that, then I did a little bit more I dug a little bit deeper, and I looked at things like our percentage for free and reduced lunch, as well as average household income. So I just wanted to speak a little bit to that, because I don't think any of these school districts really are good comparisons to Albany Unified, maybe if we're just talking about numbers. So I just wanted to share that information. So what I found, Albany Unified School District free and reduced percentage is 17.2%. Coronado was 8%. El Segundo, 2.8%. Oak Park Unified School District, 5.5%. San Marino, 2.8%. Piedmont, 1%. Okay. Average household income, Albany Unified, $87,694. Coronado, $99,641. El Segundo, $152,527. Oak Park, $129,721. San Marino, $152,527, and Piedmont was $202,631. So I just think that this information really needs to be considered when we're looking at these numbers and we're looking at how these districts are organized and the number of FTE. And I guess I'm speaking personally because I'm an intervention teacher. It looks like a lot of the proposed cuts are to staff, like teaching staff and intervention staff, ELD staff, but are we really looking at the students and the needs of our population? We have to really get down, and I mean, I know the recommendation is to dig deeper, and I agree with that, but I just think that I just want the public to understand that, you know, this is what our district looks at, and we're comparing ourselves to these other districts. Also, one more point is that I think that our district really has a passion, or I've been hearing at board meetings, of closing the achievement gap. The achievement gap is, or at least as far as demographics, our population compared to the other districts does have more of a multi-ethnic population, more Hispanics, more even African Americans comparatively to all of these districts. So those are some of the findings that I found. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Shannon Huffaker. I'm a parent in the district, and I found this report super interesting, so thank you for doing it. I just wanted to say a very personal thank you to Marie Williams and Jackie Kim, because what came through from the report loud and clear is that they've been doing the job of at least 2, if not 3, 4, 5 people, and so I'm just very grateful to them, and I know how hard that is, and just wanted to say thank you to that. And the other thing that came through loud and clear is that we really have to pass Measure B, so thank you to the volunteers, many of whom have been canvassing, a lot of the teachers, and also thank you to Tamara Keller and the other organizers who've been running it, and let's vote on March 3rd.
My name is Julie Busgang, and I'm a reading intervention teacher at Marin Elementary, and Dina said better than I could have mostly what I came up here to say, but I just wanted to emphasize that central point that how we staff and what we do is entirely dependent on the students that we serve. And that's a really important thing that we need to dig deeper on in looking at this report, because it's a missing piece. It was gotten at with that UPP number a little bit, and you could see, we were at 28.7 or something, and Piedmont was down at 2 points. That's a really huge difference in the population, and particularly when you're talking about staffing for something like ELD, when you don't have English language learners, of course your staffing will be lower. I mean, that's just a given. And so to not look at that is to really miss a big piece. And I just think that we really want to make sure that as we move forward, that we are looking at our students' needs as the basis for which we do everything. And that I particularly feel that we want to look out for our most vulnerable populations. And I know that Superintendent Wells talked about that at sort of our beginning of the year when we first got to meet you. And I just feel like I want us to keep that in mind. And it didn't, for me, look like a match, and it kind of puzzled me. And I guess we'll hear more when you talk about the proposed budget cuts. But to me, that looked like it was going towards our most vulnerable learners. So I guess I'm curious to hear more about that as it comes out.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Patty Fujiwara, the co-president of ATA, and I just have a question because under the superintendent's office staffing, that you mentioned that there was a .2 teacher on special assignment that had something to do with the union. So since I'm the union president, that I wanted to find out what that was. That was surprising to me to hear that.
So that was 0.1 of yours and Patty's.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Right.
So that our salary is paid to the district from the union. So it doesn't. So it's not part. You see what I mean? Like we pay from our union dues, we reimburse the district for the salaries for both of us. So would that be accurate to include that for the superintendent's office staffing?
Not if you're paying.
Daniela, do you want to address that?
Yes, that is correct, and that was actually the point of that. It was reflected in position control, and that was something that we don't commonly see. We don't see it reflected in the superintendent's office, so that's a recommendation to actually modify where that FTE is reflected. So that was a recommended change.
Can I ask a related question, which is, so we have certain positions that are paid for example, by one of our education foundations. Do all of those, A, in our district, and B, in the other districts, do all of those show up in this report because they're in position control? Is it possible that districts like Piedmont, for example, which raise significantly more parent funds than us, could also have staff in the classrooms that are being paid for by parents but aren't showing up in position control? I mean, this is a question, I guess, about what's common practice or what.
So I'll start and then you feel free to jump in. So position control should reflect all regular employees. The only ones that should not be in there, so any contract employees, any of your certificated bargaining unit, classified bargaining unit management, unrepresented employees, those that are regular contract employees should all be included in position control. If a district is utilizing a timesheet to pay for staff, meaning there's not a budget code maybe essentially for that function, but there's funds available available, that could be the case. I will tell you that across the state, when we're in districts, which is what we do every other day we're not here, that would be very rare as an exception to see a foundation position paid in that way. They're, I would say, 98%, 99%, just because I don't want to outlie. There might be 1 or 2%. They should all be reflected in position control. And we see that in the account code structure for each of the positions. When we receive the position control, that's a component of that. So the budget code that is charged for that position is in position control, and we could see that for the other districts where it was appropriate. So this is truly their staffing in entirety.
Unless it's a contract.
That is true, that I suppose there could be a position that's paid for by contract, but I guess I would say I think that's also probably pretty rare, but does not mean that it's not happening. It's possible.
I mean, I know we've done them on temporary basis, for example. We've contracted with people who are doing even behavioral assessments, for example, when we don't have the staffing to do it.
Right.
And so those wouldn't be reflected at all in this report.
Right. And I was going to say, depending on where they're paid from, you may see them in, if it's out of special education, for special education, so it could be from that, but it also could be in your Object Code 4000s, where you have your services and other contract amounts usually. So there is analysis that can be done in that area, but it really does require pretty deep digging to determine exactly what those contracts are for and the staff. And again, it is usually on a limited basis for certain circumstances like you mentioned. Anything you want to add?
Yes, so a couple of things on the position control report. That was part of the analysis and what makes things so difficult and what makes it work intensive for the participating districts to submit their data. They also provide their position control reports with all of their funding sources. And if something looks out of the norm in terms of what we typically see in those budget strings, we do engage with the district and ask them about that. And some do have special programs, special funding, and we do try to note that as either a footnote in the table. If something's just an outlier and not what we typically see, we try to make those notations throughout the report. And about the contracting out of services, it does happen, or employing folks on a timesheet on the long term. We also see that. However, it's not something that we recommend, because as we know, we have statutory limitations regarding how many days folks can serve as a temporary employee or substitute, and then they become your employee on the long term, right? So we just need to be careful of that. Whenever we do see that, we are sure to point that out.
I just wanted to ask you your opinion about if we would do a deep dive into special ed review using your services. Have you found that really helpful, given the comments, the criticisms that you heard tonight about how we're unique? I mean, we're different, and every district is going to be different. And if the data is old, a couple years old, is it really helpful? But at the same time, given all that, I still want to ask you your opinion about if it could be helpful to us in setting up to really evaluate our special ed services and what we might need to do.
Of course, thank you. If I may make one clarifying point first. So the staffing data that's in the report is current year, and it is current year. It's just the tables in the appendix based on the state certified data are from 2017-18. So just to make that point. So I am going to say, regardless of how you do the special education study, because I'm not here today to advocate for us to complete that for you, right? There are many things you can do to do a self-study and really dig into what the students you're serving and do that analysis internally. Of course, you need some capacity to do that, but there are tools out there that can assist you with that. I do think, it's really up to the discretion of Dr. Wells and the rest of your outstanding team that you have here of how they'd like to proceed with that. What it can give you is some further information about the students that you're serving and the services that you're providing to really understand if there are limiting factors that affect your staffing. And by that, what I mean is, are there requirements in a student's IEP that you must provide this service and you must provide this staffing? So those are things that we can assist with, or you can do a self-study on to really understand that more. And also, I think looking at a little bit more at the budget for special education. The one thing I just do want to mention that we always have to think about with special education is if we do make any staffing adjustments or augmentations, we have a maintenance of effort requirement, right, that we must meet each year. It's a federal requirement, and so we can't spend less on special education in the prior year than in the current year without significant penalty. There are certain exemptions from that, but they are very narrow. So if staff are, let's say we do reduce staff in a certain area in special education, it's likely that the district will still need to spend those funds on another special education purpose, right? So that we don't lower our total expenditure level from year to year. So there are a lot of things to consider, but again, those are all things that I think you could evaluate internally, and we're of course happy to help if you need that, or can give you some tools to do that self-study, but those would be my initial thoughts on that. What do you think? Anything?
Yes, and just to build on that, I think that when you have this information now, I think developing the next questions, and it's really, how is this staffing allocated? What is the IEP process? How are the decisions made regarding what staff we need and which positions? Really digging into those factors to figure that out will help in the progression towards determining if there are adjustments to be made or not.
I want to thank school services.
There's one community member.
Okay, but let's.
It should be very fast.
Oh,
It's just a little bit about this special ed.
sure. Go ahead, and you'll be our last on this review and discussion item.
Great. My name is Sarah Haller. I'm a resource specialist at Marin. I certainly wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but I just wanted to address a couple of things I just heard, and I really appreciate your insights into our special ed programs, although you did very clearly and nicely explain the limitations of the data that you shared, given that it doesn't look at individual student populations, disabilities, or IEPs. But one thing that you did just say right now that really caused me to jump out of my chair is that that we have to see whether the services that we're providing are legally required in an IEP, as though there was an option of the answer being no. And maybe I'm being a bit naive, but certainly in my experience, having been in the district for 7 years, we are very, very rarely, if ever, able to provide services beyond what is in an IEP. So it's certainly the IEP that guides us in how we are serving children, because that is our legal obligation, and our parents here are very engaged. Some of you regulars here who we see often, and we love that, and we love the fact that our parents are advocating for their students, and our teachers are doing the same. And so I just want to make sure that the board and the rest of the community understands that we are using the IEP to guide our services, and the way our IEPs are currently written, this is the level of staff that is being required in order to fulfill those IEPs. With the report, one of the things that I noticed for the first time was the delineation that our director of special ed / student services was listed as a 70-30 split. It had previously been described as more of a 50-50, though that was never, written in stone, but I did not quite understand that it was supposed to be a 70-30 split, with 70% of that person's job being devoted to special ed and 30% being special student services. That said, given that we went down from a 1.0 special ed director to a 0.70 FTE, as you said, Mr. Ron, that is having repercussions on us at the site level, because it's probably in the most direct and obvious way, having repercussions on the program specialists. And those positions, there are 2 of them in our district. They were also listed in the report, though not in the presentation tonight. And it's really hard to work with families to change IEPs in significant ways when we don't have the same level of support from program specialists that we've been able to enjoy in years past. And so that's just kind of my big takeaway, that if we want to shift our mentality around the way in which which we're serving our students, that's going to mean getting parents on board to make changes to their formal and legally binding IEPs. And those are usually hard meetings. And many parents want to have those hard conversations, but it's really hard at the site level to be having those conversations without the support from our district special education administrative team. And I know everyone's doing the best job that they can, and we appreciate all of your hard work at the district office. So I wanted to echo those sentiments as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks, School Services, for a very thorough and interesting discussion. And I'm sure that we're going to be consulting this for quite a while. And that brings us to our second review and discussion item for tonight, which is the superintendent's budget reduction proposal.
We are gearing up for the budget reduction proposal review and discussion. Thank you. I'm thinking to myself, I can hear myself. While we are waiting for the PowerPoint to boot up, the President gave a wonderful overview and context of the budget crisis that many of our districts are going through throughout California, even our neighbors to the north. And some of the things that we were looking at that was nationally published was the class sizes that unfortunately kids have to be subjected to. And as you mentioned earlier, our heart goes out to our neighbors where they have class sizes ranging in upper grades from 39 to 55 students a class, just unbearable. And no kids should have to be subjected to that. Despite that, we have our unique challenges as well, but they're not of that magnitude. One of which is that we are charged with the mission of reducing our budget and including anticipated expenditures and addressing the structural deficit by about $1.3 million. And so that required us looking at how do we meet our legal requirement by having a 3% reserve as required by law the third year out. And so here are some proposals that we're going to put on the table, which are really staff reduction. And as we looked at grappling, how do we go about doing staff reduction, which is not something no one I know looks forward to doing, we gave ourselves an additional charge of how do we reduce staffing without having to lay off anyone. And so something we thought that was impossible became a possibility because we were willing to do what we thought would be best for, one, our kids, two, our community, and three, our teachers. And so although this is a tough decision, we made it with making sure we didn't have to send layoff notices to anyone. So here's our bullet point. District has a structural deficit. With reserves running out in a few years, it is necessary to reduce spending now to maintain our legal 3%, as I mentioned earlier. Enrollment is down 96 students. Well, what does that really mean? That means a loss of $1 million. Well, what's the impact of that? That means some of our wonderful programs that we value in our community would dissipate. And so we have to address that issue. Good budgeting practices require that positions listed as open be included in the budget as filled. And finally, consequently, the budget to accurately reflect staffing, the board must consider this staffing resolution. Budget reduction proposal. Full transparency is what the theme is 2020 and our marching orders. So here is what we have in terms of budget reduction. You have 2 FTE elementary. Well, what is that? That's 2 kindergarten teachers that we identified. But let me say this as a premise. although this is a proposal, most of this is contingent upon our enrollment. And we currently have a very active, aggressive recruitment plan to recoup the 96 students. And so I'm hoping that we can remain optimistic that we can mitigate some of these proposed reductions. So I want to put that out there. For example, the 2 FTA elementary kindergartners, if we discovered in, say, April 1st that we have the numbers, we're keeping those kindergartners. So this is somewhat fluid, and I wanted to be fully transparent with that. We have 2 FTE Albany Middle School students, faculty members. Why? Because the numbers shows that this is what we can cut and still maintain manageable class sizes. 2 FTE at Albany High School. 1 FTE at the middle school inclusion special ed, based on the current numbers. 1 FTE elementary intervention. What that means is that some of our elementary schools, for example, have an intervention 1.4, 1.2. And so as we grappled with our most vulnerable population, and although we have to make cuts, we wanted to make sure that our elementary schools all had at least 1 FTE intervention. Like the intervention, we have cutting 2.2 FTE English ELD, and that is going to leave the rest of the schools with a 1.0 FTE, with Ocean View having a 1.2. All of these cuts equal to 1.3 million, leaving 0.2 to be reduced among classified staff. Proposal to come to the board later this spring. And so here's a snapshot of the proposed cuts. And so if you're having cuts, how are you going to retain and not have any layoffs? That's a very good question. Through attrition and retirement, et cetera, some staffs may be reassigned to those vacant positions. And so we have that commitment already going forward, and realizing that there may be some adjustments and anticipating we may have to pull back based on anticipated increased numbers. And that's our hope in terms of being optimistic. School sites impact, intervention ELD. Each elementary school that I mentioned will have 1 intervention. Each elementary school would have at least 1 ELD. Ocean View with 1.2, I previously stated. Plan to retain EL electives. We're going to keep the electives and all of our support classes. Those are things we value. As was mentioned earlier, we have to always keep in mind what's best for our kids and our most vulnerable population. So we do grapple with that and have that at the forefront of what we do. This is very, very difficult and tough, and we try to present the best possible scenario. It's even tough for me to even present this because I get a chance to visit all the classrooms and go to all the sites and see all the wonderful work that our teachers do. And this is the kind of district I would want to recommend to having my friends and people I know to come to a school district like this because of the teachers and the commitment that they have demonstrated for our kids. Next slide. Budget impacts. It helps significantly toward ensuring the district will meet state requirements of having 3%, as mentioned earlier. Does this plan eliminate the ASU structural deficit? No, but it does address it to an extent, but not fully. We'll continue to have a structural deficit unless further cuts are made. If the Measure B parcel tax revenue increase passes, will the need for these cuts be eliminated? And we need to be clear, no. These budget predictions assume that Measure B passes. So if hypothetically it doesn't, we will be looking at a crisis-like situation. Educational responsibility. School services staffing report verifies that AUSD is adequately staffed at school sites and slightly overstaffed given enrollment decline. This plan has minimal impact on class size. With no certificated staff layoffs, this plan ensures the continuity of programs and services by highly capable and stable staff. Class size impact. Kindergarten has a contractual maximum class size of 1 to 24. We historically stay below that and looking forward to continuing that. Grades 1 to 3 have a contractual class size of 28. We're averaging around 25. We like to continue to have small manageable classrooms and committed to doing that. In grades 6 to 12, there is a contractual teacher contact maximum of 150, and that can be in a number of different variations. I thought it was my eyes. I know I got to get new glasses, but this one really got me. Okay. So historical, just to take a moment, take a peek at how we look historically, and this is how we are trying to commit to remaining the same, because we know how important that is to have manageable class size. But we wanted you to see this in the spirit of full transparency, and that we look at this and value it. Sure. These are averages? Yeah, district averages?
That's Marin.
We would thank you for that. We would go back and double check our numbers, and if we have numbers different, whether we do it or don't, we report it out. So thank you for that. Has that been noted? Okay, great. Thank you. Much appreciated. And leave it up for another moment, just in case we see any other discrepancy in the spirit of transparency. And what school was that? Excuse me, what school was that we need to go back? Marin, thank you.
Correct.
17, 18. Thank you so much. Grade 5.
At Cornell, that's the one I'm reading.
I think I heard another discrepancy. I have really good hearing. Help me out there. Ocean View. Okay, thank you for that. And that's why we put this, just in case we have any discrepancy, we will go double check and have an update whether we have discrepancy or the numbers remain the same, and at least give an explainable. You deserve that. Okay, and this is, we should have copies in the back. If not, we can, if you let us know, we can make sure you get one via email. Can we go to the next slide? What if enrollment increases? That's a really good question. Then reassignments will be reconsidered and temporary teachers may be retained. If enrollment increases significantly over the summer, AUSD will hire necessary staff. And we don't want to wait till the summer to hire staff. We want to be proactive. And so we're looking at our numbers every week and hoping that we can resolve many of our issues by the first week in March. Increased enrollment at the middle or high school can often be accommodated in existing classes based on the current numbers, our current enrollment and staffing. Next. Oh, that's it? I usually have at the end a light bulb with questions. Okay, you didn't do that one, okay. The Part B of this report would be done by our CBO.
So Dr. Wells just went over the budget reductions of 1.3 million. And currently this item is for 1.1, but I'm going to just talk about 1.3 million in total. So when you see this is what the number that it was brought to the board for the first interim, that we are 1920. And in June, I will bring the 3 years, the next year and next 2 years, 2 subsequent years. So we are at 1.1% of reserve. So now with this 1.3 million cuts, we have our fund balance up to about 8%. Well, however, we will have these raises scenarios, right? This is just assumption that we use 2%. 1% for us means 330,000. So we have a raises of 2%, which is 660. It happens 1920 all the way there, because it happens in this year. That means it's going to carry over for all the next years. Then we will have about 3.58%. Okay. And when we have, let's say, 3% raises, this is just assumption, then the 3% cost is about $909,000 for AUSD total, including all other benefits, right? The payroll taxes. So that means we will go back to about 1%. So, okay. Up there. Okay, see. So for us to address, let's just move to the next chart. The next scenario, this is the ideal scenario we have. So Dr. Wells is now working with our staff to recoup these 96 students. So with these cuts, with the 3% raises, if we can recoup these 96 students, we will be about 6% on year 3 and the additional years. In this case, this is where we will see maybe this scenario or perhaps this scenario where we are. This case, we can maybe do about 40 inter-district transfers in 2021 year, then we can make this as a 3%. Or we will have to cut another 500,000 in 21-22 because the budget reductions Dr. Wells is bringing up today is for 2021 year. That means additional cut will happen most likely 21-22 years if we don't have additional at least 40 students.
But you're assuming we would absorb those 40 students without adding any staffing?
Right. So this data doesn't
Or the
have-
96 students.
Right,
with
that is
no
correct.
additional
So
staff.
actually, in reality, this 96 students, maybe, I mean, this, there's going to be additional expenditures for hiring additional staff. Perfect timing. Do you want to?
Just so that. Yeah, just so that everyone can hear your question.
Sure, thank you. Sarah, again, just for clarity, are the raises considering all bargaining members and administrative raises? Who are those raises for, those projected numbers? That $330,000 that you said is 1%? 1% of what?
So 1% of all AUSD. Because we are still in negotiations, I cannot really different.
Of course. So that would incorporate all the bargaining members and the administrative
Meaning,
team.
right, we have a lot of confidential staff as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kim. I want to bring it to the board for comments or questions, and then to the community.
So I have a lot of thoughts. I guess my first question is, in our spirit of transparency, I think we should discuss what the implications are for the classroom of these reductions. I don't think it's feasible to say, for example, that we're going to reduce 2 kindergarten teachers without an impact on class size. And I'm assuming that these, that all of those budgets assume we have the same enrollment this year, next year as we have this year. So if we have the same number of kindergartners but 2 fewer teachers, what does that look like? And I think I'm asking that question all the way throughout here. And I understand that we're facing terrible decisions, but I think we need to be really clear about what the implications of those decisions are item by item and not be naive about these not having an impact on class sizes or education.
I think, first of all, I appreciate your question. I haven't studied the new math, but I do remember the old school math. And so right now we have about, I think it's averaging 17 students, extremely low in kindergarten this year. And by reducing that, I think our numbers came out to 23 as average. So there will be an increase, but the increase would be at our historical range of average. And so,
The number in the table is 20, not 17.
For this year?
Yes.
We played with some calculations, and I know minus the, actually we can do it again right here. And feel free to chime in, staff. when we played with the numbers a few weeks ago, the number we came up with the reduction with the same was, I believe, what was that, 23 or 24? Because we did play with that. It does increase from this year, -2, but it's still within the contractual limits of our small class sizes.
Can you put up the the class size table again?
The one with the color.
I don't know who I'm looking at. So you're saying we would,
From Frank's report, right?
from the, I don't know where it was.
It was from my presentation?
The ones that were in color?
Yeah.
From,
Yeah, the one on Adobe.
Yeah.
And then go down. No, not this.
I think it's the next tab.
And then
yeah, it's in there.
to the table with the colors.
Is that true?
So for the first item, you're saying reducing 2 kindergarten teachers, assuming that enrollment holds steady, we would go from 20 to somewhere in the neighborhood of 24.
Yes, yes. That was the number we came up when we did it, but we rerun the numbers. But it was below the contractual requirement of 25.
And what was the,
Oh, 24.
what was the, so that's the only cut you're proposing in, aside from the intervention at the elementary level. Is that because you couldn't increase other grades, or can you talk us through why you're proposing that particular reduction?
This one was based solely on the current enrollment.
But for example, why not increase class sizes in 4th grade or versus kindergarten? I'm just trying to sort of.
Yeah, that's a good question.
The thought process.
Kindergarten and 4th grade are 2 different areas to assess. For example, with the exception of kindergarten, you can have, historically, you could just roll over and have a pretty accurate prediction. Kindergarten, you don't have that because with the birth rate, you don't know if they're coming into your school in kindergarten or going to a neighboring school. Or going to private school. And so it's really a guess. And sometimes a hit and miss. And so that's how kindergarten would be different, say, from a 4th grade, because if it was a 4th grade, we just roll the numbers over to 5th grade, and they're pretty solid, much easier to predict.
And then from what Jackie's saying, if we did have additional kindergarten enrollment, higher numbers, we actually wouldn't increase staffing in response to that, although we would have to because we'd be close to the contractual limit. I'm just trying to think about, how does the increased enrollment help us?
One way it helps us, for example, say middle school, that has a low number of 6th graders coming in.
Yeah, I guess I mean particularly at the kindergarten level. And this is, I think, a little bit tied to my concerns I raised, I think it was the last board meeting, about trying to fine-tune things at the kindergarten level when, as you say, there's a lot of uncertainty.
Right.
So if we go into the staffing budgeting only for the contractual limit, then we have very little room to maneuver if we have higher enrollment. And I don't necessarily want to belabor the kindergarten point because I want to raise the same questions about each of these, which is, for example, what the second reduction item, what is your vision for what the impact would be of reducing 2 full-time teachers at the middle school? Where are those teachers coming from? Sorry, if you still have the kindergarten. Yeah.
No, one of the points I made a few meetings ago was that we always try to, I think the kindergarten point is important. I think we should spend a little time on it. We've already reduced their actual class time significantly, so talking about reducing 2 additional teachers, I think is an important topic that we should spend a little bit of time on. I'd be very interested to know, 1, as a board member, but 2, as a current parent of a kindergartner, how this is going to affect the kindergarten class that's coming in with 2 less teachers, because I've seen the current interactions. I've seen how the two teachers that are in that class right now are working together with each other and partnering, and it's fantastic. And my daughter currently knows both teachers really well. She likes Pansy more, but she knows both teachers, and they're working together really well and really helping the class, and I think the students to thrive, even though everybody knows that I was against the proposal to make the change. But now we're here, so we want to make sure that we don't put any other changes or take anything else away from the kindergartners, because we've already taken enough.
Trustee Dawes, I think you hit a highlight about kindergarten and maybe an unintentional great benefit where teachers get to team teach, and because at a key period of time in a kindergarten that you have a significantly lower ratio just because you have two teachers in there at a particular time. So that is a benefit. The challenge for us is that we have to make some cuts, and the issue become how and where. And so no matter where you make them, it's going to be really tough and rough. So a lot of this is going to be fluid. You know, we can entertain questions of what if this and what if that, and it depends on a real scenario. But we use a number of things that we consider. One, how do we not adversely impact the classroom? Two, how do we keep all staff so that we can have the continuity of a highly quality staff? And three, if we do make some cuts, make sure we make them with an explainable. But a lot of things are really contingent upon the enrollment that we have in the spring, and we don't know what that's going to be. And so all it is now is a guess, and hopefully an intelligent guess. And so I'm sounding like the attorneys when they respond with, it depends. And it really does depend on the enrollment.
Superintendent Wells, while you were asking about kindergarten specifically, our student services coordinator has been running sort of a live count every week, and so I just took a look at the last live count. So the last time the live count was taken of every student in every grade level was back on January the 24th, 2020. And so when we look at the numbers of, this is just specific to kindergarten, when we look at the numbers of kindergartners that are currently enrolled relative to the capacity for the number of kindergarten students, there are at one of our schools 24 open spots in kindergarten, and there are 27 open spots at the other school in kindergarten. So if sort of relative to the question of sort of what would the impact be, right? There are currently lower numbers of kindergartners than we anticipated, and we saw this happening in sort of late in the summer. And at that point, we were not able to make that adjustment. And sort of to Trustee Doss's point, didn't want to start the school year by further reducing the staff at kindergarten, but there right now are 24 and 27, I think is 51 open seats in kindergarten. So if we were to remove potentially 2 teachers, I'm just speaking to the math here because you asked, I think, sort of a question a little bit about the math. So there's no judgment in my response, but relative to the math, there are 51 open spots in kindergarten right now.
I think my look is confusion because I'm trying to understand what that means by open spots.
So if we think about a full class having 24 students, our kindergarten classes currently don't have 24 students in them, and if we add up all the difference between the number that currently is enrolled up to 24, the total number is 51. Just the math. I just wanted to provide you with the math.
Thank you.
For context.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Board Member Clark.
Yeah, just briefly, I want to say I'm not in support of raising class sizes at any grade level, but especially kindergarten. With the schedule being changed the way it is, we claim that we don't know why enrollment's dropped in kindergarten, but I have a pretty good feeling why it's dropped. And for people who are watching this who are concerned about their incoming TK and K children, I think it'd be one more reason for them to possibly look to go somewhere else. So I hope that that has actually been part of the thought process here, because I know that there's some folks out there who've been having some discussions on next door, this and that, and kindergarten has come up. And
don't have children that young, but I could understand where somebody who's considering where they want their child to go, and if they have the option to go somewhere else, I think this would just be one more reason for them to lean to go somewhere else. Hearing this early on in open session that we're talking about having these classes at 23 to 24, so just wanted to state that.
I had two questions. The first one was, our education and inclusion specialists, do they mainly work with students who have disabilities or IEPs, or what is the population of students that they usually work with?
Typically, they do. What we discovered in some of our special ed folks, they're not, all of them are not traditional. They do some things where some don't have a caseload or have a half a caseload, and then half a caseload plus a half a caseload equals a full caseload. And then if you do strictly the numbers, you have 1 plus or sometimes 1.2 plus. So it depends, but typically, yes. So your question is yes.
Okay, and then secondly, intervention specialists, do they also work mainly with students with special ed?
No. At each site, it's done a little differently, and it's typically a pull-out program for kids who are in need of more one-on-one, smaller class sizes, and that's something that Albany's cherishes, and so it's mainly a pull-out program. Some schools try to have a push-in program, which is the ideal way of going about doing it, but it's to address some of our kids in most in need, mainly focused around literacy.
Many focused around what?
At the elementary school,
Okay,
literacy.
okay. Got it. Thank you.
Well, that's okay. I just wanted to go down the list and hear more about what the impact would be of who are the, not who, but what are the 2 FTE positions at the middle school that you are proposing to reduce?
The 2 FTE at the middle school is basically general FTE. So based on the schedule, who's ever doing the schedule, they have X number of teachers. And based on what the kids need, they decide what FTE or what teacher would cover what class. And so they have more flexibility at the middle school and high school than you will at the elementary school, where it's restricted. For example, 3rd grade is 3rd grade. At the middle school, not so much, or the high school.
So what would this look like in terms of a difference in the classrooms at the middle school?
I think with the same numbers, 2 less teacher, the math would tell us the classes will be increased. For example, some of our classes at the secondary, in some periods, we have counted 18, 17, 21, where they have room for more students.
Just if I could just ask, could we have those actual numbers from both the
We can pull,
middle school and the high school?
yes, we can pull the class list from both the middle school and high school, the master schedule.
So that we can see that, as opposed to each teacher gets 150 contacts at their highest level, but rather if we could kind of see it by either departments and then broken down. So that
I think we can do that. We can print that out, right?
So that we could see those class size numbers. Thank you.
I had a comment earlier. There was someone who came up and said we should be, our action should reflect the needs of the students, which I think is something we can all agree on and makes a lot of sense. And I was looking at the number of English language learners at our elementary schools versus our middle school and high school. And so the middle school and high school combined is 160 English language learners, but at the elementary schools combined, it's 422. And at the upper schools, we're doing -1 FTE in English language development, and at the elementary schools, we're doing -1.2, which isn't a very big difference, but there's a really big difference in the population of students that are needing English language development services. And so I don't know if that's something that is, I don't know what the needs or what the specific needs of those students at each site are, or if there's really big differences, between the level of need at our upper schools versus our lower schools. But if it is fairly uniform, then it might make sense to actually kind of level out the amount of, or the positions that we're taking away from the lower schools and the upper schools to reflect the number of students who are needing English language development services.
First of all, that's a wonderful observation. So thank you for that. But pedagogically, many of us teachers in California require to have a B-CLAD or a CLAD so that we can address our English language learners in class, which is, based on the research, the most ideal way to do that. So most of the EL second language learners are getting instruction inside the classroom. However, when you have the ELD specialist, he or she will identify the most needy. And in our district, we have more of a pull-out program to address our kids are most in need in developing languages, those who are far behind. So we have that fortunate opportunity here. But most ELD learning and students from second language is addressed in the classroom. And California requires us to have a CLAD or a B-CLAD, which is basically a skill set to address our second language learners inside the classroom. So all of those kids do not get services, that number you identified, but those kids most in need are the ones who are identified and get those pull-out services. And then there's a philosophical, pedagogical, and research difference where many of us believe that the most ideal way to service our kids is through inclusive and differentiating our curriculum inside the classroom. And some prefer the pull-out. For example, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, professor at Stanford and our chairperson on CTC, who authorizes every teaching credential in the state of California, says the best way to address our second language learners is inside the classroom through an inclusion process by delineating your curriculum. So there's pedagogical reasons for why some school districts have it all taught in a classroom opposed to pullouts, and then sometimes it's a hybrid. So I just wanted to give clarification to that, because that observation.
Okay.
I think I puzzled you based on your face. Did I make it more?
I'm confused how it relates to what I was saying, but maybe I'm just missing something. If those numbers that I was talking about aren't quite correct, the hundreds, I got them from the dashboard, so I don't know if it's totally up to date, which you showed me recently. It was very helpful. So if that 160 at the upper schools and 351 at the elementary schools for English language learners isn't quite correct, if we're looking at the people that the English language development FTE would be serving, what are those numbers? Like how many people do English language development specialists work with at the elementary school and elementary schools and the upper schools? And it's fine if that number isn't here right now, because that's really quite random, but right now, what?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
That's a good question. No, I think we should ask, because that's a good question. That's how because that's part of the innovation and creativity. For example, if your caseload maximum 28, what 28 ELD students will we serve? And so the staff gets together and strategize about maybe the most challenging, or those in most in need of some intensive instruction that we might call our tier 3 level. And tier 1 is what everybody gets. Tier 2 is what some who are falling behind gets. And then tier 3 are your most needy, where you have addressed them through smaller sizes, hence come the caseload. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't have to go into it anymore, and I think I've kind of made my point, but basically what I'm just trying to say is that probably the cuts that we are making should really reflect like both the need of the students and also how many students are actually going to be receiving those services, so that you know, you're not taking away the same amount of FTE from each school, but there's like a very big difference in the students who are actually needing those services in each school. So that's the point that I was trying to get across. That's it.
Board, may I open it to first student board member Malott, and then if I can open it
No.
up to community?
No, I have questions.
Okay, board member Malott, and then Vice President Duran, and then,
I have a question too.
okay.
And then we can open it.
I'll be quick.
And then the community, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if this is quite what you were saying, but I think there's like a very even spread between the different sites, which I understand the reasoning behind, but I also think that if 2 FTE is being cut at the high school and a total of 3 at the elementary between 3 sites, but I think right now the high schoolers can definitely might be able to like adjust to larger class sizes than an elementary school class. So I think that should also be looked into, and how, you know, just because it might be like a larger rate at the high school, that doesn't mean it's a larger effect.
Okay. Vice President Duran.
I really like this conversation because I think we're going to have it sooner than later, or later than sooner, but so this is a good start, I think. I think we're going to have more conversation with the community about this. But first I'll start by saying I really understood what you were saying, Trustee Weinstein, and I agree with it in the sense that when the kids are younger and we can see those kids that have some extra needs, that if we could address those when they're little, kindergarten, first, second, third, then maybe by the time they're in middle school and high school, we don't have those challenges anymore, and we can focus on expanding them in other ways. I have an issue with talking about the most vulnerable students, because honestly, I think all our students are vulnerable. I think there's so many things going on that impacts them from society, et cetera. Today, there's just so much that I think all our kids are vulnerable. But I think what I would say is that we have students, and I'd want to be really clear, that are struggling academically. And once again, if we could focus on those kids, a laser focus on them when they're little, I think it will make a difference, not only for the teachers in the classrooms, but for those kids, right? In terms of all they can learn. So I really would want to reemphasize the need to focus on those kids at an earlier age. However, having said that, I would also say, and I'll just say it straight up, I don't think having 24 kids in kindergarten is a negative thing. I think 24, I didn't teach kindergarten, I taught first grade, but 24 I think is an okay number. I think what I feel in Albany when I've been with my grandson in kindergarten has been that those classrooms are really small. And I think down the future, we're going to have some new school sites that are going to have larger classrooms, so that the little bodies can have lots more space to run around in, et cetera, and have centers and all those kinds of things that kindergarten and first, second, and third graders should have. So I think so in saying all this, I think we have to look at what Albany has had in the past and what we're going to have to deal with in the future. Everything from new sites, which is very attractive, that the community has supported consistently, but also the fact that the state is not supporting our needs nor any other school district. So we're going to have to deal with that, I think, realistically. We're going to have to be really honest with ourselves and say, yeah, it hasn't been too bad in Albany, but we may have to tighten up our belts, and we're going to have to decide how that's going to happen or where the cuts are going to be made, because I think if we don't have some reductions, we are definitely going to be hurting, and to stay fiscally solvent, we are going to have to make cuts. But I think that, I mean, I sort of felt, no, I don't like what they're going to do with cutting the interventionists at elementary, because I remember at the beginning of this year, we heard the interventionists from Cornell present here. And I was just in awe with what they were talking about in terms of the students that they serviced, because when I was teaching, we had to figure out ourselves in the classroom, but having the interventionists that could really key in on certain students makes all the difference, and those teachers were showing that it was making a difference. And so now today, in terms of thinking of reducing those positions, really bothers me that we would have to do that. Maybe we will, because we have to face it today, and not kick the can down, as you used to say, in another year or two. But so I think there are things we all have to keep in mind, and once again, we're all going to have to give up a little bit, I think, so that the kids all get what they need.
Thank you. Trustee Doss, please.
I just wanted to learn a little bit more about the inclusion specialists and give a few more details about their role.
The inclusion specialist is a special ed position, and they carry a caseload and adhere, I'm being very general, adheres to the IEP that, because of the caseload of special ed kids, adheres to the IEP of each of the kids on that caseload. Oh, thank you. The question was, well, you heard him. Generally speaking, because this is a special ed teacher with a caseload of students, they adhere to individualized educational plans that are written out. And so each kid may be getting something a little different based on his or her own individual IEP. And so their needs are met through this person.
The reason I asked is because I was looking at all of the other positions on the list, and that was the only one where, I mean, I'll just be honest, I didn't have as much information and background on the position. So if possible, you don't have to do it right now, but I'd like to learn more about that position, how it directly affects the students, especially if we're talking about special education, because we've had a lot of input from parents in regards to special education. So I just want to learn more about that role.
Yeah, it's a good point. Duly noted.
I have one thing to say right before community input. This is kind of on the same note that I was talking about earlier, but if we're taking away 2 FTE from the middle school and the high school, there's a lot more students at the high school, and so it's going to probably affect more people. That being said, I know that maybe middle schoolers have a more difficult time with larger class sizes because they're younger and it's just difficult to manage that, and that might be more important when considering this. But for 1 FTE being cut at AHS, that's 580 or so students being affected, but at the middle school, it's like 430 students being affected just for one FTE being cut if it's just general education. And so it's the same thing that I was talking about earlier, which is like what are the needs of the students and how many students are going to be affected by each cut. And I don't know if considering the needs of middle schoolers to have smaller class sizes is more important or kind of outweighs what I'm talking about. But that was one other thing that I wanted to point out. You look confused.
Well, I was stuck on one teacher, 450 kids being impacted, when one teacher can only have maximum of 150 or less. So I was a little puzzled on that one.
Yeah,
That's why.
Do you want me to just tell you how I got that? Okay. I basically just took all of the students at Albany High, like 1,168, taking away 2 teachers, 168 divided by 2 is 584. So it's like, that's how many students are going to be affected per one cut. It's just a way to like level out, and for me, it's a way for me to see how many students are going to be affected and like try and understand the relative impacts of the cuts on each school. Does that make sense now? No? Okay.
Well, I mean, I understand your math, but I don't think it's a reflection of how that actually works in real life.
I think this is why it would be helpful, maybe as you deepen your discussions with site leadership, to be able to be very specific about every student's going to have a larger Spanish class, or all of the math classes are going to be bigger in 8th grade, or just I think some degree of specificity would help us understand help us evaluate the plan, which eventually we'll have to be voting on.
Yes, I agree. Okay, can we open it now to community members? Thank you, board. Go ahead.
Sarah Haller again, teacher at Marin. I've also been an intervention teacher for many of the years that I have been in the district. I served both in special ed and intervention, so I can really speak to both of the hugely important roles that those positions play. And I just wanted to echo your sentiments, Board Member Weinstein, about looking at need. And what I heard Dr. Wells say is that we're going to make it such that, and I could be misquoting you, every elementary school will have at least 1 FTE in ELD and just 1 FTE in intervention, aside from Ocean View, which I believe you stipulated would have 1.2 for intervention. So I totally value and recognize the motives that might be behind that in creating a feeling of equity amongst the resources that are shared evenly between the sites. But I would really, again, just echo what you had said about needing to consider the need. And the need for intervention at Ocean View might be greater than the need for intervention at Marin. And so when we can get to a place where we have district leadership to support us in developing really clear and consistent guidelines for which students get intervention services or which students get ELD services based on a particular clear and defined cutoff, then we can really begin to think in a much more strategic and thoughtful way about how we can fairly and equitably use our resources based on students' true needs. And I think that really should be at the forefront, because as I'm sure many of you have heard, fair is not equal. Fair is someone finish the rest. It's late. Fair is what kids need, right? And it's not always equal. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Naif again, and even though I'm on the Budget Advisory Committee and other things, this is just my own personal opinions. So there's a lot of concerns. This is the first time seeing these cuts, even part of that committee. And I want to just focus on 2 areas. One, it seems these cuts, we don't know all of the details that are happening with these cuts. What are the effects on each of these? It doesn't fix our structural deficit. And there's a lot of unknowns, especially like how much we're going to get for class sizes, for enrollment or not enrollment. And it seems the focus is to take away some important resources, for instance, ELD, and then just place it on the teacher and then increase their class sizes, which I don't think is a very educationally sound way to put forth. Second is just the process of this whole part. I was a little, again, shocked because as a member of the Budget Advisory Committee, we have not only that resources, but amazing community members and teachers who would provide some incredible input about some of these answering some of these questions that you are asking as board members, and we haven't had a chance to do that yet. So I'd like to see that process really be flushed out. Thank you.
I'm Julie Busgang again. Echoing what Stephen just said, sort of a note on the process, I also was sort of surprised how this, in the past when we've done budgetary conversations, it's been after a really extensive process and looking at community input. And this came out of, I don't know where it came from. So it's sort of not having had time to process it and, again, wanting to look deeper at what's going on. And then I also want to sort of bring to mind some considerations that are going to impact us in making some of the decisions. And that largely has to do with the construction that's going on, and thinking that right now, Ocean View, although it's called Ocean View as one school, is split between multiple sites. And when you're looking at something like ELD support services or intervention support services, that's really different when you're in one school versus trying to serve maybe the same number of students, but at 3 different places. And knowing that that's going to continue and then roll over to being an issue for Marin when we are split at multiple sites. So I think any budgeting decision really needs to look at what the structure is going to be for those schools, because that's going to impact things. And then the third thing I want to say is, in talking about models that serve children best, I really appreciated Vice President Duron's reflection on the early intervention. And I wish I had the numbers handy, but if people wanted to look that up, there's a lot of data where spending money sort of 1 year at kindergarten is like worth 4 years in the upper elementary grades. Like the longer you wait, the more you end up spending to give the student the support they need to be on grade level to a point where maybe they don't need support anymore. So I really want to encourage us to invest in that early intervention. And I also, in looking at models of support, the idea of a push-in model versus the idea of a pull-out model, there are a lot of variables that go into that and into the impact. And so I personally, the program that I run is intervention, looks very different years. The degree to which I do push in versus pull out, and it's entirely based on the students that I'm trying to serve. And so I would not want to have a flat model that you must do it this way. I think it's a lot less effective. And I think one of the ways that we have been particularly effective is having flexibility. And lastly, an important thing to consider when looking at staffing and needs is the more effective you are with intervention, the less it's going to look like there's a need. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you should remove the intervention, because that's what is keeping the number of students who are at risk looking lower. So I'm just saying that a more successful intervention program isn't a reason to cut an intervention program.
Hi, my name's Dina Yu again. I work at Ocean View in ELD and reading intervention. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I do, because I think there's a lot of questions about what the program looks like. And I think a lot like Julie said, it is kind of very much a hybrid model. And it just depends on the groups. So for example, I have a group of first grade, all boys that I work with. It would be really hard to do an in-class push-in model. They need to be really focused in order for the intervention to be really successful and efficient for them. So it looks different at different grade levels. Sometimes if there's a bigger gap in terms of what the needs are, then sometimes we find the pull-out model to be more successful. I've also worked in 5th grade last year doing in-class support, where I did a lot of team teaching in terms of reading intervention. That was really successful because that worked for the students I was serving. So I just feel like it's important to understand what we do. I think that should be first and foremost when looking at cuts that are made, right? And then I want to speak also about the ELD program. So at Ocean View, I was just talking with my colleague over there, Corby Westwood. She's a full-time ELD teacher, and we were just discussing how many students we serve. We believe that there's at least about 10 students per class that are identified on our caseload. And how we serve them depends on where their levels are, right? So there are kind of the beginner students. Those students traditionally have a more pull-out model, either during the early bird or the late bird time. And then we have, I would say for most of the rest of the students, it is a push-in model. So we are in the classrooms most often during writing time because we feel like that's a time where we can best support them. Writing is a time where there's a lot of individualized instruction and conferencing happening. So, for example, we're in second grade classrooms. I primarily work at the annex, but I'm also going over to the other now high school site, helping to serve in 2 third grade classrooms, working specifically with students that are identified as English language learners. So I just wanted to kind of give you that snapshot, but I highly encourage all of you to come and see what we do and to just better understand our job before making those cuts. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda Bishop, second grade teacher at Marin School. And I just want to clarify, you said the 2 FTE cuts in elementary, you're looking only at kindergarten and trying to increase enrollment to 24. And I just want to clarify that you're not considering raising class size, the verbal agreed upon limit of 25 in 1 through 3. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about combination classes, and just wanted to be really open and transparent about that.
We haven't even had a discussion about combination classes.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of combination classes. I started off, just so you know, as a kindergarten teacher in San Jose, where we had 1 to 38, 1 to 41, and 23 years later, I was a little jealous when they went to 1 to 20. Now they're up to 1 to 24.
Good for kids.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, long overdue. We're not. I have not considered not even remotely about combination classes. I dislike them with a passion for some obvious educational reasons. With the increase of students coming potentially, because this is fluid, a lot of things we don't know, it depends. Mm-hmm. But we have a commitment to try to keep the classes manageable and small, and that's what we're trying to commit to.
Okay.
But I wish I had all the answers. In full disclosure,
I know you
I
can't,
don't.
and I appreciate all the work you're doing, all of you. I know this is hard work. I just want to make sure that we're being really transparent and open, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. I appreciate that.
I just had one more quick question about the ideas that you had mentioned that your admin team is aggressively working on building enrollment through interdistrict transfers and, of course, our own Albany population. And as a parent, I may have missed any email about this, but I'm just wondering when the rollout would be I know it was in a recent board packet, but I don't believe that I saw any sort of follow-up or decisions that were made as regards to that. So I'm sure that there are plenty of staff in the room who, if we knew that TK and K interdistrict transfers were going to be, strongly considered, if not granted, I know myself, having young ones in a preschool, there would be tons of families who I could say, hey, word out is Albany's accepting transfers at TK and K. But I kind of haven't gotten any indication that I should start putting that out there. So I just wanted to ask if that sort of decision is going to be made soon, and if you are planning on soliciting either staff or parent community support in helping to publicize that and make referrals.
Okay. Thank you for that. We had a presentation just on that on our recruitment plan and what we plan to do last, I think it was last board meeting or board meeting before last. Mm-hmm. I can forward to the PowerPoint and entertain additional questions, but basically we identified some schools and some advertisement revenues, avenues for advertisement. And I think we open up the enrollment interdistrict transfer. I think March 1st is the agreed upon county date. And so something should be coming out within a week or so, ranging from the East Bay Times to other means of communication. I'm drawing a blank. And also our visit to some of the schools where we have the largest space available, incoming 6th grade and incoming ninth grade as a target area, but accepting at most grades that are available. We're trying to not, I want to highlight this point, not trying to fill to capacity, but only trying to recoup the 96 students we lost. Because again, that's $1 million that would have an adverse impact on our programs that we value here, and not the rationale, and to give kids an opportunity to come to a very desirable district, Albany Unified School District, but 96, not fill up to capacity, because we enjoy small campuses and manageable class sizes. So I did want to highlight that in terms of our attempt.
Great, thanks. So I would just encourage you to use the resources that are within our district by sending perhaps a staff update or a parent update, because it's one thing to pay for advertisement when necessary, but it's also really wise to use the resources at your disposal that are free.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, one more thing before, I know we're over time, but one more thing. Right now, one of the proposals is to cut 1 FTE at the elementary school level, and I remember I believe our last meeting, we were talking about our achievement gap, and there was like a really huge gap between what looked like our white and Asian students and then our black students, and I'm just looking back to my notes about that, and it was saying, I mean, our black students perform like 25 to 30% lower than white students in our district, which is obviously, I think, our district's role and also society's role. And in math, it's 30 to 35% lower, which is huge. And so I think that cutting intervention at elementary school, and these numbers are for elementary school, is really dangerous, because I would assume that interventionists have a huge part in leveling the playing field and kind of equalizing those numbers a little bit. And so that's why I feel really nervous about the proposal to cut an intervention specialist. And then the second thing I'd like to say is, I don't actually know personally, I'm 17, I don't know what is actually going to make the biggest impact on students of color in terms of equalizing those numbers. But I think that probably a lot of administrators and teachers would know much more than I or maybe some of the members of the board would. And so I think in the future, consulting more with administrators and also teachers might be a really great way to figure out where can we make the cuts that are going to least impact our students, and particularly vulnerable students or students of color who are performing at lower rates. And so I remember last year with the administrators coming here, it was like, I was like, whoa, this is so cool. All the administrators are coming together and they're giving their proposal. This is awesome. And obviously it was a hard subject, but I think that they did a really great job personally. And so going forward, I'd love to really see more of that, because I think that that's where I and all of us could see proposals that would make the cuts the least impactful, which is ultimately what we all want to do. Thanks.
Well, let me say this first. Board Member Trustee Weinstein, I really appreciate your passion, especially around a humanitarian and equity approach to our most needy kids. And you raised some issues that are big that I wish we had more time to talk about. Trustee Doss really was the impetus behind us having an upcoming workshop. But I just want to answer your question in one way, because I think what I got from your question, it caused me to pause and think, what are the best ways to address our most needy kids? And according to our leading researcher, and based on some of our own experience, including mine, the best way to significantly close the achievement gap and even eliminate it is through having systems, a tier 1, 2, 3 approach, and through having formative assessments that we use as staff that we administer quarterly, and we use the results of the data to inform our instruction. So John Hattie says, in some situations, he's our national leading researcher around student achievement, that the best way to improve student achievement is to carve out time for teachers to look at data and determine next steps, especially around the most vulnerable population. And that is the best way. And some of the research is when people engage in that on a regular basis, for example, you can take a 4th grader who's 3 grades behind, they could make up 3 grades or 3.5 grades within a year by giving teachers an opportunity to look at data, have them come up what it means to them, and how to respond to the data based on our most needy kids. So that's one strategy, is a pedagogical strategy to address that. In addition to that, independent of that research, I think, let me just say, all teaching is not equal. And what I'm saying by that is that I had a chance to visit lots of intervention teachers in action in our district, and they're the best I've seen. They really are. And so you heard here the fluidity and the freedom and innovation they have because they care passionately about kids. And I think staff makes all the difference. So one of the things about the budget cuts, and I'm not talking to you per se, I'm just the whole audience, is that nobody wants to do this.
Yeah.
I don't want this job of having to cut anything, but I have it. And so the challenge is, what do you cut with the least amount of adverse impact to students? And right when you think you know, you have to pause and question yourself. This doesn't feel good in any way. I talked about, well, look, hey, we have it where we don't have to give any layoffs. But why does it hurt so much? So I grapple with, if not this, then what? But I'm keeping an open mind. I really am. And so I really appreciate your thinking and your caring, mainly about those kids who need most of our attention in the form of equity. So thank you. You say you're 17? I worked with people who are 5 times your age, and they don't come up with half the brilliance that you demonstrated tonight. And so don't let your age be a hindrance. Let it be something you embrace. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. That's really important. You know, you said 17.
I'll be 18 on Thursday.
18 on Thursday. There are, when we're talking about the achievement gap, some people call it a opportunity thing.
Oh, yeah.
There's, well, it doesn't matter what you call it. The students are there and they need the help. And there's people, like he said, twice your age that you try and explain it to them and they don't understand it. The point that Dr. Wells mentioned, I think, is really important. So we should take that into account as we make these decisions of having that group and everybody getting together and having those talks. But the only way that those talks are going to be successful is if everybody participates. And so what I'm encouraging is let's keep that momentum. And that everybody that plays a part in the achievement of students participate in that workshop, participate in that conversation. One, everybody just coming to being on the same page as to why we're there and why we're doing the work. And once we have an agreement that it's happening, then we can go about fixing it. You can't. The example actually that was given to me at one of the workshops that I went to recently was it's really hard to fix a flat tire if you don't believe that the tire is flat. So you have to actually realize that the car isn't working the way that you want it to work before you can actually fix it and have it running efficiently. So the first thing that we're going to have to determine once we are all in the same room and all these great minds are thinking is we have to realize that it's an actual problem and that make it 911 emergency, that the kids aren't, you know, that it's happening right now. It's not happening tomorrow or the next day or next year, or that it's happening right now. And then once we come to that conclusion, then we can really start to determine how can we fix it and how can we close that gap to where it no longer exists. But no, so really great points, and I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you.
And you know, the last time we talked, there is no rush, so don't worry about that. Even though you got school, so if it gets too late, you need to let us know.
Oh, I don't have to go to school until very late tomorrow.
So we got time.
I don't have a second.
But I appreciate that.
Thank
So
you.
Sarah was going to say something. I cut her
Go
off.
ahead, Sarah. You go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about the next steps in the process, in particular how, responding to what Jessica said, oh, she's not here anymore. We outlasted Jessica about the role of the Budget Advisory Committee. Could you describe what the next iteration of this is and how it interacts with the budget that's going to be presented to us on March 10th?
And if I could just add to that, because there are 2 areas that we really haven't discussed. I mean, CBO Kim raised it, but there's two issues that I think have to be part of this ongoing conversation. One is declining enrollment, and Sarah sent us a really good article to the board members about declining enrollment, and we definitely need to understand that. And the other is salary increases. You presented it tonight, you showed us what it looks like, but we haven't talked about that in terms of, we're on one hand doing staff reductions, but what are the implications for that? What else is going on in the district that impacts on that? So we definitely have to be having this conversation.
Thank you for that. Trustee Hinckley, thank you for the question. We want to take what we brought to the board and take it to the BAC and grapple with it. Hear alternatives and take that input and then huddle up and see whether or not we need to make some adjustments based on additional input when we bring it back for March the 10th. But it may look a little different based on the input.
And what's the date that the committee meets next week?
The 4th, March 4th.
I would remind the board that in order for the 2020-21 budget to be adjusted, that the board will be asked to pass a resolution at the next meeting. Now, that resolution would not trigger any certificated layoffs, but it has to be done by that date. So we can continue talking as we start to work on the 2020 budget, and about these different positions and where we're going to put staff. But but at the next meeting, there will be a resolution that we will either pass or not pass that will control whether our CBO will be able to adjust our budget with these fewer positions in it. Although making that budget adjustment, like Superintendent Wells has said, will not create any certificated layoffs.
Can you clarify what the resolution would be?
I would ask CBO Kim to do that. Well, okay, I'm here in the calendar right now. It's Resolution 2019-20-16, release non-reelect temporary certificated employees.
Okay.
And if that is not passed, the budget cannot be adjusted. And that would mean that we will definitely be in qualified status probably immediately as soon as the county analyzes the budget.
Yeah, it would be potentially rejected because it doesn't meet AB 1200 as required by the law. And so the law requires us to adhere to those parameters, and this would be missing a piece of that parameter.
Is this the same resolution we passed last spring at this time? Just noticing all temporary employees?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of discussions to be had. I think that at the next meeting, the board might want to discuss some particular questions we would like the Budget Advisory Committee to consider, and information that we would want them to bring back to us. And with that, we will move on to our review and action section. And that 13-1 is agreement for design build services with Alton Construction for Marin Elementary School reconstruction project and authorization to proceed with phase 1 of the agreement for pre-construction and design.
Thank you. At January 2020 board meeting, the representative from the Alton and LCA team present their design concept. And the school board approved the CBO to negotiate the first contract terms with #1 ranked team, which is Alton, and bring back the agreement to the board. So this evening, we are requesting that the board review and take an action, approve the agreement for design build services with the art and construction for Marine Elementary School project, and authorization to proceed with the phase 1 of the agreement for pre-construction and design.
Board, this was a very lengthy section of the agenda packet, and I know that there was a question about what legal counsel we have that vetted these documents. CBO Kim, would you like to, or Dr. Wells, would you like to talk about, all these construction documents and how they get developed and processed and looked at before it comes to the board?
Sure. So once our project management, Juan Boroso from DCA, reviews the documentation, and I take a look at it and we send it out to the attorney. And as you can see, that attorney will also sign this contract as well as the district. And the attorney also went over the languages with both me and Juan Boroso. We had a conference call, and we make some adjustment here and there. So there was a lot of process back and forth with the district, attorney, art and construction, and DCA team. So at the end of the day, we all agree with the terms and languages, and then we bring it to the board. So that's why we were not able to make it at the last meeting, and it got pushed to this board meeting.
Thank you. Board, open it for questions.
Who are we asking the questions to at this point?
Either CBO Kim or I see right here, Alton Construction.
Okay. One question, well, I had several questions. Some of them were answered by the staff, but one thing I wasn't clear about at all, and I couldn't find it in all that document. So I'll just ask about I had a question about the seismic work to the modules, and I didn't see anything in reference to that in all this paperwork, and I'm wondering about that because we're going to have 3 modules on the site, and how is that being addressed? What does that look like, and how much does that cost?
Vice President Duran, can you clarify if you're talking about temporary classrooms or if you're talking about the existing buildings?
No, I'm talking about Marin when it's completed, and we have 3 modules, old modules that are staying, right, that are being interior paint and exterior paint.
So the existing buildings that are being retained.
Correct.
So the
existing
NPR, the
ones.
library, and the administration building.
Right, and what work is going to be done on that to bring those up to code or upgrade them, and how much is going to cost, and is it in the budget already?
Yeah, so I'm Andrew Nortz, Vice President Operations, Alton Construction. Yes, it's in the budget. I don't have the actual breakdown of it, so if you're specifically on how much that's going to cost, I don't have that. But so on the pods, we separated by pods versus the modulars. You said modules, so there's 4 existing modular classroom buildings that are actually totally current. They don't have any seismic issues that we're aware of. Those are just getting painted, basically. That's all been part of the proposal. The sort of quad buildings that are being saved in our proposal are getting a voluntary seismic upgrade. That's a technical term, according to DSA. It basically says we're going to do everything to achieve collapse prevention, also a technical term. That just means that the buildings will be upgraded to the point at which students and faculty can exit safely in a seismic event. It won't collapse. It's collapse prevention, right?
But that's basically what we have at this moment.
No.
No? Well, okay, tell us what we do have at the moment.
I don't have the technical expertise to do that. I think we had a structural engineer here at least once before talking to you, Mark Moore. The buildings are not, they are currently up to code because you don't, by code, have to change anything if you don't touch it. Okay. So yeah, I can elaborate.
And if I could just say that civic or civilian understanding is simply that at this point, for example, at Marin School, that the building would hold up in terms of earthquake today, but it was not going to be habitable on return. And so my understanding was now with the new, with the quad building that you mentioned, that there would be some kind of upgrade to that.
Yes, it's a voluntary.
So it's more than just the roof staying.
Yeah, I mean, I can't get into that. I don't have the technical, every detail to tell you. There's going to be a whole, well, the next year is going to be all the design process. So us actually getting into what it's going to take to achieve the technical version of collapse prevention, the technical version of voluntary seismic upgrade without triggering what is mandatory upgrade and all the other aspects that go along with that. So it was presented as what your guys' budget we felt could afford, best afford. And so you basically get all new interior spaces in those buildings and you get an upgrade to what is voluntary seismic upgrade for those buildings.
I asked all my earthquake questions last time.
I
did, yeah.
And was it answered to your satisfaction?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, to the extent that I think I understand what's happening, but I think what you're getting at is both today and once the buildings are retrofitted, it's not the ideal, right? They're not going to be upgraded up to what a brand new building would be, what the brand new buildings at Marin will be. We can't, we're in the same situation with the Ocean View buildings, whereas he said if you do a certain amount of work, you trigger a requirement that now it meet the current codes. So they're not doing that amount of work. They're doing an amount that gets it safer than it is now, but it won't be, there isn't enough in the budget to get all of these buildings up to the current standard that a new building would have to be built to, right?
I mean, that's such a delicate thing to say, right? I'm not trying to mince words here, but basically, if you go past voluntary upgrade, you are effectively you'd have to spend so much money that it would make more sense to tear the buildings down.
Right.
So, and, we're just trying to manage resources as best we can for you guys and for your community, and this whole night's been about managing resources, right? So, tough decisions, but our team felt it was the best use of the resources to do what is a voluntary upgrade and give you brand new internal spaces with the understanding that if there's a major seismic event, yeah, you might not end up with use of that facility, but you will guarantee safety.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, so I think my question that I actually did have last time as well, not to you, but to the staff would be, are the parents of Marin clear about this? Totally. I understand your committee, the committee that met at Marin, is in agreement with this decision, but does the larger Marin community understand this? And if not?
Go ahead.
Well, I don't think you can say that about any community. I mean, there's always people in any community that are not going to be engaged or not part, yeah.
But I don't want to, mince it so much that we're talking about each and every parent. I'm saying as a parent community at Marin, given that their kids are going to be there, do they understand that there's going to be this quad building that's not going to be inhabitable afterwards?
I can tell you, I don't think there is yet a uniform understanding, but I think we'll be in the process of, when we have our assemblies and our parent night, that we will be given more than snippets about what our school would look like once it's built and reviewing plans of that sort. But to your specific question, does the general community have that understanding? My guess would be no, not yet.
But you will work on that.
Not me, but we. We would work on that.
You, the district office.
The community, the team, the leadership, the Marin, and all the folks.
I can just tell you really quickly. There was a brief meeting with the principal after Marin Morning in February, and she mentioned that we were going to keep the current buildings. I mean, she didn't say, and they're not going to be inhabitable after a major earthquake, but she's told that. And we're having she's also on the agenda to talk about it at our next PTA meeting, which is next week. So I think it's on, but it doesn't seem like we have any choice. We have to keep those buildings. It's not on the table to not keep them, because it's definitely clear, and it's clear to me as a parent at Marin that there's not enough money. So, you know, I don't know that the words have been said like, so you might not be able to use these rooms after a major seismic upgrade. So maybe that needs to be made more clear at the next meeting.
What I would suggest is that sometime, you know, in the next 8 months, that we have an engineer give us a presentation about the structural integrity of the buildings at Ocean View that are being voluntary upgraded, and what we expect from the performance from the buildings at Marin. So I think that will have to come from an expert, because we are really not qualified to speak on this. Okay. And
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you being here. Right? And being a previous Marin mom, I think I will make the motion to approve. Get it right. To approve the agreement for design-build services with Alton Construction for the Marin Elementary School reconstruction project, and authorization to proceed with Phase 1 of the agreement for pre-construction and design.
As a current Marin parent, I guess I will second.
Awesome. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
See, the motion passes unanimously with the absence of Board Member Clark. Okay.
Thank you.
And now we move to our next review and action, which is updates to board bylaw and Exhibit 9150, student board members. I hope to hand this over to our student board members to run this.
Yeah, so, I mean, we discussed this last time, so now it's up for approval or not. I have one amendment that I brought up, the issue that if there were 2 seniors to be on the board at one time, because this process does allow that, what the process would be for that, so it, you know, there's not a frenzy. So there's a sentence that we have the handout, and it's, in the event that 2 student board members are seniors, the selection process for student board members will begin in February to enable a shadowing period to occur. This shadowing period will serve as a training for the rising student board members before their tenure begins. So if I was a senior along with Michaela, then whoever the next 2 student board members would be shadowing us at this time, and, you know, coming along to board meetings with us and getting a training before we leave.
Thank you very much, student board member Mala. Can we roll the screen up a little bit so that the board can view all of the red text, so we can see the bottom of it? Okay. Okay, and one change that student board member Mala also noticed is the revision date is incorrect. The year should be 2020. So, since our student board members do have the right to make and second motions, I leave it in your hands.
I need to get the right wording. Do you have that? I move that we approve the update to board bylaw and Exhibit 9150 student board members.
With the amendment.
With the amendment, thank you.
I second, yeah, right. It's important.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Thank you for your work on this. This is it's a really good update, and it's an improvement of the process, and so we'll be the board will be grateful for these improvements in process for many years to come.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you to Audrey. She completely led this effort. I kind of stepped away because I'm not going to be here next year, and I just thought it was fitting, and I also have a bunch on my plate, and I'm also a second semester senior. So I just wanted to say thank you for leading this process, and I'm excited to see who's going to be serving with you next year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good job.
Board, we're at item 13-3, vote for delegates for California School Boards Association 2020 Delegate Assembly.
Madam Chair, can I have the privilege of reading the background while you're...
Please.
Yes, the background information for this vote. The California School Board Association Delegate Assembly is a vital link in the association governance structure. The Delegate Assembly sets the general policy direction for the association. Working with the local district, county offices, the board of directors, and executive committee, delegates ensure that the association reflects the interests of school districts and county offices for education throughout the state. The Delegate Assembly is made up of more than 280 elected board members from CSBA's 21 geographical regions or sub-regions throughout the state. They meet twice a year to conduct business and may also meet with the other delegates and the director within their region. Furthermore, they participate in California School Board Association events and maintain contact with local boards in their region. There are 3 positions that are up for votes and 4 folks participating, 4 candidates. And Madam Chair, the board has been in receipt of their paperwork and ready and prepared to vote.
Okay, and our student board members provide advisory votes on this. And we always, our practice is to start with our student board members. And so I believe, Dr. Wells, you have a sheet? Yeah.
Yes, I have a sheet. I'm assuming the sheet is the order of voting?
Not exactly. So we rotate who votes first on different items when we're being called out individually. And so I think that the first candidate is going to be James Aguilar, and we'll take student board member Malaz's vote first. Dr. Wells, you'll record these votes?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would record these votes.
So I just say yes or no?
Right, with the understanding that you have 3 votes for all within these 4 candidates.
Okay, no.
Yes. Okay, and then for our older board members.
More experience.
This first one will start with Trustee Hinckley.
Yes.
No.
Anyway, let's make sure our recorder is up to speed. You got it? Okay.
Yes?
Yes.
No.
We have a...
Okay. So our next candidate.
Well, maybe we should count them before we, sometimes in the past, we've lost track of the votes. So if we can just make sure, I think it was, what, 4-4 or something, or?
You want to give the ayes and the noes for?
Yeah, we have, among the more seasoned trustees, we have 2 noes and 3 yeses.
Okay.
Among the school board trustees, we have 1 no and 1 yes.
Thank you.
Now, our next candidate
Lisa.
is Mia Lisa Bonta, and we'll start the voting with student board member Weinstein.
Yes.
Student board member Mala?
Oh, yes.
Okay, and then we'll start with trustee Doss.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
I missed trustee Hinckley.
Oh, I didn't
It should
vote,
come back around.
that's
That's right.
Oh, yeah. You didn't miss anything. Okay, so it rolls back around to,
Did I wake you up?
We knew this would confuse the older
okay.
members. Yes.
Madam Chair, we have all yeses, 2 yeses from student board trustees and 5 yeses for the more seasoned folks.
okay. Our third candidate is, excuse me, can I read that? You can get that for me. Ann White. And we will start with Board Member Mala.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and we will start with Board Member Clark.
No?
No.
Yes.
And then back to Sarah.
No.
Yes.
Madam Chair, among the school board trustee, we have 2 yeses. Among the Board of Education members, we have President Tutain, yes. Vice President Duran, no. Trustee Clark, no. Trustee Hinckley, no. Trustee Doss, yes. The noes carry on that one.
Could you give us a number?
Well, it's still,
3 noes and 2 yeses.
3 no's and 2 yeses.
we still have one more person.
Right, so we get
still
3.
going.
We get 3 yeses. Okay, and so the final candidate is Monique Tate. And we will start again with Student Board Member Weinstein.
No.
Yes.
Okay, and now we'll start with Vice President Durand.
Yes.
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 Okay.
No, I still
Here,
got
Clark.
Yeah.
Trustee Clark.
yes as well.
Yes.
Madam Chair, we have among our student board members 1 yes and 1 no. And among the school board trustees, we have 5 yeses unanimously for Monique Tate.
So do we,
Okay, so can you give us our overall results?
Wait, can you go over that again? Can you go over the votes one more time?
the last one?
Yeah, the last one we just did?
It was 5.
5 yeses
5 went
here.
out.
It was 5, oh, okay, okay.
Madam Chair, of those who we are moving forward, we have James Aguilar. We're moving forward. We have Melissa Banta. We're moving forward. And then we have Monique Tate. We're moving forward. So those are 3.
Thank you, Superintendent Wells. Okay?
I would send this to the necessary parties to make it official.
Thank you.
Yes.
I had a little question.
I like him. He's a youngster.
And we move to
Something the other day.
13-4 on our agenda, District Board Policy Committee membership.
Good evening, Superintendent Wells, Board President Chutain, board members, community. The purpose of this item is to approve the changes that the Board Policy Committee outlined at its last meeting with regard to the composition of the Board Policy Committee. So this item first came to you for review and discussion at at our first February Board of Education meeting, which I believe was the 11th. And so we just are seeking on the committee to ensure that we have full representation on our committee, and so are hoping that you would approve our inclusion of 1 community member and also remove the stipulation that the student representative be a student board member.
Do we have questions or comments from the board? If not, may we have a motion?
I move to approve the district, the changes to the District Board Policy Committee membership.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay. Our agenda now comes to staff reports. We have a local control and accountability plan update from Assistant Superintendent Williams. Oh, excuse me, Board Member Clark.
Yeah, just real quick, a real friendly request for Assistant Superintendent Williams. You're very thorough on your reports, and sometimes You're very thorough and you're fairly quick too. So a kind request to please be as thorough as possible, and thank you.
Did you leave out the quick?
I didn't want to say it twice.
The hint is, give us an abbreviated version.
Be as thorough and as quick as you can.
So the purpose of this item tonight, and I will be brief, noting that the hour is late. The purpose of this item tonight is to share with the board and community just a brief update on our local control and accountability plan development process. I like to bring this as an item at about this time of the year prior to releasing the online survey, because I want folks to know sort of why they are getting the survey and what our process will be. So as Trustee Clark noted, most of the relevant information relative to the development of the ALCAP in general is provided in the board backup. Basically, in 2013, we moved away from categorically funding positions to a system of allocating dollars to districts based on enrollment, so that's base funding, and then also dependent on the numbers, percentages of students identified as English learners, foster youth, and also students who qualify for free and reduced meals. The hour is late. Additional funding is allocated, and that was sort of referred to in the earlier report today about staffing. And so as an accountability tool for the allocation of those resources, districts are required to develop a local control and accountability plan, which addresses how we will meet the needs of all students, and in particular, how we will increase and/or improve services for students who are identified as unduplicated. You will see there in the third paragraph of the backup the areas that we are required to address in identifying annual measurable objectives in the development of our document. I will say that the LCAPs must be approved every year on July 1st and are put together as fixed planning documents, so they live for 3 years with some adjustments. We are in the first year. This year we are planning for next year. Next year will be year one of a new 3-year cycle. So I think there's some momentum and enthusiasm and an excitement about going back and looking at our plan and finding out about ways that we can really sort of leverage this new opportunity to really build a plan that supports all of our students. Our LCAP is based on our district strategic goals around increasing academic success, supporting the whole child, communicating and leading together. The important part I think I want to mention in the little time I have is that we have begun our stakeholder input process. So we identify a series of meetings that we go to and visit with folks from a sort of a number of groups. So examples, because this is one of the questions. Examples are we solicit input from every site staff. We solicit input from our district English Learner Advisory Committee because we are required to. We solicit information from our Familias Latinas de Albany group, also from our Black Parent Advisory group, and our high school principal has graciously agreed to solicit that feedback at the next meeting, which is happening, I believe, on Thursday. We also do visit or have our site principals engage, did I say site councils, and PTAs are the other two groups. And this year, we also visited with our special education advisory group. In addition to that, the online survey is available to all members of our community. We send it out broadly to all parents in the community. That email will go out this week. I wanted to announce its impending arrival and then send it out with much fanfare toward the end of this week. One of the questions, and it was a good one, was about what happens if we don't get enough input at a meeting or we don't have enough participants in a meeting. And that's happened twice thus far. And so what we do is reschedule and have a second meeting so that we can increase the number of attendees. Last year we did an experiment where we tried to have community-wide meetings, just had an open meeting for all members of the community, sent information through InTouch, and also had our sites communicate that information. Unfortunately, we had one parent and one student attend the sum total of those two meetings. I think our community really likes when we go to them, and so we will continue that practice this year. Last year we had about 193 responses to our survey. The year before we had had 25. So maybe hopefully this year we can engage more folks and get more responses. The other group that I neglected to mention and continue to meet with our student board members and also Leo, who is our student representative on the advisory committee, is we will be engaging our secondary students also. So we are in the process of finalizing what that will look like. So our hope is that by the end of March, we will have input that then our advisory committee, which has been meeting, I believe, since October at least once a month, can chew on as we think about how to identify then annual measurable objectives and then also aligned actions and services that will move forward in our LCAP and come to the board for public hearing at the first board meeting in June, and then for approval at the second board meeting in June. But between now and June, you will hear my plan is at least once monthly updates. The idea is that I don't want to bring the document in June and folks haven't seen it before, don't have any sense of what's going to be in it. So just a preview of what some of the upcoming reports will include. We are required as part of the LCAP to put together an annual update. So we will sort of bring an overview of that annual update to the board prior to the final approval of the document. We also will do a synthesis of the stakeholder feedback. In past years, we have downloaded all of the feedback, taken out any names, and then presented all of that so that the community can see the sum total of the feedback we've received. So we'll bring a synthesis, of the feedback in terms of major themes, and then we hope also to preview actions and services that would be included in the LCAP document. One final note before I conclude, the template has changed yet again. I think it's changed in its last 5 or 6 years, maybe 4 or 5 times. So the idea is that the template this year and moving forward will be a little shorter, sort of more succinct, more condensed, and more accessible to parents. To what extent that will be the fact, we don't know yet, but we will be working with that new template. And so I'm looking forward to this process. Our committee meetings have been super robust. We have tried really hard to have representation from all of our sites, and then also sort of at least one representative of our different stakeholder groups to ensure that we have sort of broad voice at the table. We're not a large committee, but they really do a lot of great work. Board member Duran is on that committee, and I appreciate her support. And so this is the first of a few more presentations, so I will stop there and look forward to coming back and maybe talking more the next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments from the board? Yeah? Okay. Thank you for the update then. That brings us to our upcoming agenda items. And actually, if we can show the slide there. Okay, these are March items. This is not just our next meeting, it's our next 2 meetings. We have the second interim financial report coming up. The release non-reelect certificated employees resolution that also is March 10th. Census resolution for the 2020 census, how our district can support that effort. Then later in the second meeting, I think we have our audit report on bond measures B&E, and I expect that we'll have construction contracts ongoing through the rest of the year. Also pointing out, we have special board workshops that are being scheduled for academic achievement and also equity training. The agenda items that I heard mentioned tonight were a discussion, hopefully at our next meeting, about what we would like the Budget Advisory Committee to work on and address specifically, and maybe some other next steps regarding our budget plans going forward. And I also heard an agenda item that I spoke about getting a seismic engineer's opinion of what the voluntary seismic upgrades at Ocean View and Marin actually mean. Anything I missed?
This is a question that came up when we were at the CTA breakfast. I'm not sure whether this board ever endorsed the new version of schools and communities first, whether we had a resolution. And I wasn't able to find one online. So if we didn't do the new one, I'd like
We should,
to
yeah.
put that on the agenda.
We'll check on that. And with that, we are adjourned.
Yay. So this confidential one, can you shred this one, Frank? Or-
I think that Simone was going to collect those.
Yeah. Let's leave them up here.
No.
I want to pass on that confidential one, Brian.
Yeah, let me make sure.